We are here today with Teresa Gao. She is the co-founder and managing partner of Acrew Capital and one of the most powerful women in Silicon Valley. Teresa, thanks so much for having us.
Thanks for being here.
So Teresa, you sit here as one of the most powerful women in Silicon Valley, arguably one of the most powerful women in business, but you didn't start out that way. I think your story is really emblematic of the American dream. And you gave a TED Talk about the American dream. And without going into the TED Talk, what does the American dream mean to you and your personal story?
It's so central to my personal story. I really believe, I know it sounds maybe corny these days, but I believe in the fundamental point that with all of our challenges and both as our country, but at the end of the day, the American dream still lives because it lives in people like my parents and me and my sister and millions of other immigrants who came to this country to have a chance at a better life. And you know, I never thought that I would be here. I was born in Jakarta, Indonesia, and came with my parents when I was a young child and ended up growing up in a town of 2,000 people outside of Buffalo, New York. And I never dreamed that I would even be in Silicon Valley. I honestly probably didn't know what it was. But that just goes to show you, right, that like, look, you also need to have some luck, but someone once told me that you can improve your chances at luck by working hard, getting a good education, and then really going for something that you're passionate about. And I'm truly passionate about startups, and I've been fortunate to make a really amazing career by combining those things together.
What did you want to be? What did you imagine would be your career?
So when I was younger, so I've always liked math and science, so maybe it's not a surprise that I became an engineer, although nowadays I really just spend time backing other engineers, but that's fun too. But when I was younger, I was really, really interested in being an astronaut. Sally Ride was kind of like, you know, before Sally Ride existed, I was all into reading like The Right Stuff and fighter pilots, but I realized that while I could, maybe I was good at math and science, maybe I could help be part of the engineering teams to design those planes or those aircraft. I have terrible eyesight and also probably would never make it through, you know, aviation school. And so there you go. Let's design aircraft instead of becoming an astronaut.
So you went to school for engineering?
I did. So I ended up getting a degree in material science and engineering, which it did a lot of work on ceramic composites, which are actually critical to spacecraft and aircraft, but particularly because they are highly resistant to heat and temperature changes, so it's critical for re-entry from the atmosphere. So a little small part of it, but there was a through line from the little girl who read The Right Stuff.
Oh, I love that. How did you go from that to Silicon Valley? From NASA to Silicon Valley, if you will?
Well, I was never even NASA. From being an engineer at like General Motors and British Petroleum working on these, you know, new generation materials. So as part of that work, my whole family, they're all in medicine, which was what they wanted me to do. And I had different ideas, so engineering was the next acceptable career to them. So, but all I knew about business was like really big companies. Like I said, I did an internship at General Motors, I did an internship at British Petroleum. But so I didn't even know what startups or Silicon Valley was, but I saw that the people who were engineers that had the jobs that I thought were more interesting weren't necessarily the ones doing like sitting in the lab or behind the computers doing CAD/CAM drawings like what I did as an intern. They were actually the product managers. So they would take that research and then actually design it into a product. And all of those people also, they had engineering degrees, but then they also had business degrees because they needed to understand both the consumer demand side of it as well as like, we have to build products that are safe and manufacturable. So based on that, I decided that I would try to get an MBA because at that time they all had them, and studied for my GMATs, and then I was fortunate to get into a bunch of schools, but Stanford was my first choice because it was in the middle of Silicon Valley. Again, I still didn't know about startups, so I wrote about I'm going to become a product manager at like Hewlett Packard or some, you know, one of the big companies that existed back in the 90s when I went to business school, and then really being here, really literally at the cusp of the internet, right, the early 90s. I remember downloading Mosaic, which is what Netscape became, in the computer lab when I was at business school at Stanford, and that just kind of opened my eyes to like, oh, well, you can be a product manager but at a big company, or they're actually these startups that, are raising money from venture capital. So that's really, I kind of fell into it that way. So then I joined a startup with some classmates from Stanford. We raised some venture capital. That's how I learned about the venture side of things. And then eventually, as they say, I joined the dark side and became a venture capitalist and have been doing that ever since.
Side note, I think that phrase is so funny because it's such an intertwined ecosystem. Entrepreneurs need funding.
Yeah.
Investors need something to fund.
So I think they're saying it's intertwined, right? Because it's like the force, right? There's the light and the dark. And in fairness, the entrepreneurs are the light. They are the ones who are the optimists, who have to see the future and then really try to build it, right? And I don't think we're the dark side, but the other side, the yin to their yang.
There you go.
You're right. I agree. It's an ecosystem.
Do you remember your first investment? What was the first company you said, that, I want to invest in that?
So the first company that I invested in, so this was 1999, and actually it's interesting because there are several big companies right now that are doing this. It was in an entrepreneur that I had worked with before, and he had an idea to build sort of internet software that would allow people to make real-time credit decisions in order to extend credit, whether that be e-commerce companies or businesses to other small businesses. You can think of it in some ways essentially, and they started out a little bit around the same time. So, and this company still exists. It's a company called Bill.com. It's not that different from what Bill.com does today. But in the whole full circle, so that was, that 1999, that company ended up getting acquired by somebody else. So it wasn't a huge success. But interestingly, in full circle, Bill.com bought one of our Acrew portfolio companies last year. So it's just kind of really interesting how the lines connect somehow.
That's incredible. All right, let's talk. I love full circle moments, and I wanted to talk to you about Acrew. You founded Acrew in 2019. You were 51 years old, and you very quickly, or maybe it seemed quick to the press. It probably didn't feel quick to you. I think your first fund was $250 million debut fund. Mm-hmm. Talk to me about how and why you started this.
Yeah. So, I guess the biggest thing I would say is looking back, co-founding Acrew with my partners was the best career decision I've ever made, hands down. And I know that, maybe particularly in these times, but kind of always, right? Like the idea of going out on your own and leaving your firm, whether that's a venture capital firm or a big company, and starting something on your own can seem really scary. But now, with the benefit of hindsight, I feel like it's actually the smartest thing you can do is to bet on yourself. Because as managers, right, we choose people, to hire, to promote, and or also as investors, like, whether it's projects or companies to fund. And we do it in large part, especially at the early stage, on the people. Like, do I believe you are going to be the right leader for this business? And calculated risk is what investment's about, risk reward. Who do you know better than yourself? And so betting on yourself sounds scary, but it's actually probably the most informed bet you'll ever make on a management team. Who can you know better than yourself?
You make it sound so easy. My mind is blown. That it requires a great deal of self-assuredness.
So I will say I am very fortunate in a couple of ways, right? So I didn't always have this self-confidence, but sometimes things happen in your career that seem like they're a big disappointment, and you find yourself being braver and having more self-confidence to try something new because the path you thought you had in front of you isn't exactly what you thought it would be. So I'll be honest, that was part of it. I'm not sure I would have done it, except that there were some disappointments that led me to sort of rethink what I wanted to do. I know that I was very lucky that I was able to do this, both from the standpoint of being at a stage in my career where I had the resources to take a chance on myself, and that I have amazing support from my family and my partners to do all of these things. So I want people to think it's easy, but I also want people to understand, I understand, I understand the pragmatic part of it too, and a lot of things have to be in place. So with that said, I think that, it's turned out to be the greatest thing. You mentioned the debut fund. We've been fortunate. Acrew Capital now we have over $1 billion under management. We launched Acrew Diversify Capital Fund, which is the largest venture fund focused on increasing diversity of stock ownership in tech startups and bringing those people into the wealth generation and onto the boards of these companies. So I'm really excited to be able to bring together my professional passion with my personal passion for better diversity and inclusion in tech. So I'm super excited and I feel fortunate. I also think the other big thing is, as working moms, we convince ourselves that we need to take the safer path professionally in order to be more stable for our families. And notwithstanding everybody's personal circumstances are different, understanding I was fortunate from that perspective, I have actually found that I'm able to be much more involved and engaged in my children's lives while also being as excited and probably, knock wood, as my career has actually taken off. So both things have really taken off. My relationship with my kids, my ability to, because part of it is when you're the boss, whether it's a venture firm or your own business of whatever sort, I'm pretty sure my partners would say, I work just as hard, if not harder, than I did before. But the difference is I control the timing and the agenda. So, and I think everybody on the Acrew team really appreciates this. So we have a thing, right, which is like, I learned pretty early in my career that if we give people the flexibility to hey, we understand it's important to show up at your kid's soccer game, or, if your kid gets sick, then of course you drop everything and go to the doctor, or your parent, or whatever. When you give people that flexibility, I found that people actually work harder and feel much more aligned and committed to the place where they work.
You hit on a lot of really important points in what you just said. I want to start with the learning moments. Mm-hmm. And I want to ask the question this way. Was there a moment before starting Acrew that you were looking at your career and you thought, I can't do this, I need to give up, it's too hard, juggling family, juggling personal goals, juggling this important work? And if so, what was that moment?
There was. So I've talked about this some. So there was a point where I was having some challenges both at work, and it also coincided with my divorce from my kid's dad. So as you can imagine, that's a lot of change going on at the same time. And I thought about, I had been really fortunate that I was in a position where if I didn't work again, my family would be fine, and I could be there, 100% for my kids. Should I just give up venture capital? But I realized a couple of things. One was that the setbacks in the career weren't really related to investing or working with the companies. It had more to do with the culture of the partnership dynamic. And I was like, well, you know what? I have a pretty clear idea of what I would like that culture to be. And I still love working with my companies, and I still love meeting new companies and potentially investing in them. And I think actually the biggest thing was that I realized during that time that I could be there for my kids. My kids were very young then, so I could do nursery school, drop off and pick up, or volunteer to be field trip chaperone for my older kid. And I could do all of those things and still do what I loved. And I actually think, probably not the little one, but the older one was kind of like, you know what, Mom, you're it's better, because they were getting to, my kids are far apart in age, as you know. So the one that was older was 9, and was kind of like, it's really great that you're starting to come to the field trips and stuff, but yeah, you don't need to be here all the time. So I was like, okay, this is a good balance. It's so just make yourself available in the moments when they want you. And now that they're teenagers, now I really understand. It's being around, but not being around. So when they want you. So it's a long answer, but the short answer is, I had this epiphany where it was look, obviously going through a really hard time for our family. I'm happy to say we're all a big, beautiful, modern family, blended family now. But part of it was the insight from one of my kids, and part of it was just in talking with many of the entrepreneurs that I was fortunate enough to work with, they were like, look, we haven't seen any change. Because I was like, look, I'm going to have to be a little bit like, context switching, not always as available for these next few months while we figure out the new schedule and everything else. And, to hear one of them say like, look, we've known you for a long time and you seem happier than ever, despite I don't even know what's going on, because you're like, you're just still there for us, right? And to have your kids say the same things. So then I was like, okay, maybe I could do this. There's no, like, I'm still young. There's no need to like give it all up. And maybe I think in the long run, it was probably better for my kids because I don't think I am, but I could see how if it was like to put the career in a box and then just focus on the kids, I could see how I could have become a helicopter mom. I know that about myself.
Treat your kids like a portfolio company. They'd be like, no, thank you.
Well, it's actually why the portfolio companies don't want you to just have one, right? Like, it's good to have like 5 or 6 because it's like if you're just focused on them all the time, it's like a little too much.
So it sounds to me, and I've talked to a lot of powerful women about what were the conditions that allowed them to rise to their position. It sounds like you're describing a support system, but I don't want to put words in your mouth. How would you describe the conditions that allowed you to sit in the seat that you sit today?
Yeah, absolutely. So look, it definitely started kind of going back to the question about my family and emigrating here and the importance. It definitely starts with my family and the support of my family early on, and sort of telling me that, look, school is really important, work really hard, be very serious about that. But also even later in life, like my parents live half a mile away from here. And especially when my kids were young, and even now, even yesterday, when I had to be in 2 places at once, they help with everything from like helping kids pick, and it's important because frankly, now that I have one that's older, I see how strong the relationship is that they have with their grandparents. And so it's a wonderful thing. Not only does it alleviate mommy guilt if you can't be 2 places at once, but it's really wonderful to see the relationship, multi-generational relationship amongst the family. So it definitely starts with that. I do think, I don't know whether it's education, but like a love of learning, right? Like the thing I love and why I went to the dark side, right, is I get to work with 5 or 6 companies at a time, all building different technologies, different stages of their growth, different business models, and I get to meet dozens of new companies every month. And so if you really like learning about new things around business and technology, so I think it's like creating the right support system around yourself. And then, frankly, I used to give younger executives, like, find something that you're really passionate about, because look, I used to give this talk to a lot of like young in their career people, right? It's like, look, you've already, you've done school, maybe grad school. You're clearly like, you've got the raw materials to be great. Find something that you really love, because if you really love it, then the chances that you'll be not just good, but great increases. And at the same time, and maybe this goes to like, take a chance on yourself. If at any point in time you're not loving, and I don't mean every day, obviously no one loves their job every minute of every day, but if for a long period of time you don't love what you're doing, don't be afraid to change and do something else, because it just increases the chances that you'll be great at it. Because it doesn't feel, it's obviously work, but it doesn't feel as much like work if you're getting enjoyment from it.
Now, we are sitting here today for the 50 over 50 franchise, which celebrates and highlights women who are stepping into their power over the age of 50 and beyond. Did you ever imagine your career when you were, say, a teen? Did you ever think, when I'm 60 years old, I'm going to be doing this? What did you picture?
So I definitely didn't picture this. Like I said, when I was a teen, I didn't even know really anything about Silicon Valley, and I probably didn't even know how to spell venture capital, right? So not this for sure. Honestly, when I was a teen, I would have thought being in my 50s, I was like very old. I would not have thought that I would be doing anything much. So I don't know, maybe I thought that I'd be like, an engineer somewhere, but getting close to retirement. And honestly, like now I feel like there's still so much ahead.
Do you feel like being over 50 is an advantage or disadvantage in your line of work?
So I think the answer is contextual. So sometimes it's an advantage and sometimes it's a disadvantage. A lot of times, so we back exciting new entrepreneurs, and in many types of companies, as I'm sure you've read about, many people are starting their companies very young. So when I started in venture and I was more their age peers, now it's very different. So I think it can be a disadvantage from the standpoint of the next great 20-something entrepreneur is not necessarily going to be found by me. But that's why it helps to have a partnership that truly, like we're fortunate we have 3 generations. So that partner is probably going to be found by my 20-something-year-old partner. On the where it can be an advantage though, is what you talked about before in terms of the fundraising, right? So like our investors who are, university endowments, family offices, they tend to appreciate people who have a long track record, who they can see, investing and returning money to their investors in both good cycles and bad cycles. So now I have the fortune or good or bad fortune of, having started my career in the crazy 99, 2000, and then down through 2003, and then also obviously 2008, 2009, and now the current environment. So it depends on the context. I think with certain people who you work with in venture, it's an advantage, and with others, it's not. And then even in working with the companies, being on the board, like it's just, it is an advantage to have seen, have been through 10 M&A transactions and, literally hundreds of follow-on financing. And so in that case, now I've kind of like grown into it. I can be the elder statesman, if you will, on the board, who can, that the entrepreneurs will turn to, like, okay, especially now, how do we think about what to do when the macro environment is changing, not in a good way for us so rapidly? How do we think about this and find the right balance of, conserving cash, but still going after the opportunities for new technologies and growth that we see? So I would say on balance, I choose to think of it more as an advantage, and in the places where it's a disadvantage, I think that's why you have partners and colleagues, and you find, you fill in for each other's strengths and weaknesses.
That's a healthy perspective. We had someone last year for this package tell us that she was told venture is a young person's game. Mm-hmm. Why are you trying to start your own firm? But it sounds like you've had a different experience, and one that allows you to layer your experience on top of your teams.
Yeah, I had those same questions asked of me when I started when I went out and started my first fund at the ripe old age of still in my 40s. I'm aware of that, and so I think it is very much around, it's building a partnership, and you build the right partnership. Just like some of my partners are really, really amazing at investing in fintech companies, and I do a lot of cybersecurity. Just like in that same way, there's other things, So it's about building. It's like building a team. I'm a big sports fan, so the analogy, and I'm a big Warriors fan, so the analogy is like, you don't want 5 players who are all 7 feet tall and play center. You still need a point guard to bring the ball up. You literally need like people who complement each other.
You just alluded to sometimes being the elder statesman in the room. To put on that hat, as you look at women who are just starting their career in their 20s or maybe in their 30s and are experiencing burnout, we have seen record rates of burnout through the pandemic and pressures on women. Uncertain economic environment doesn't help the situation. What's your advice for women? Let's start broad, just in any sector, in any career right now, who might be thinking, I can't do it, I need to take a sabbatical, or I need to make a change, or this is just feeling too hard. What do you say to them?
First of all, I would say I think that this has been a very hard environment for a lot of people, and I hope that through things like good reporting like yours and elsewhere, people are at least more aware of the unique, and I'll call them extra challenges that working moms have. Not that the environment hasn't been challenging for everybody. And my advice would be, if you feel like your current situation isn't sustainable for yourself, find a place that does sustain you and can still work with your life, your family, as well as your work. Now that might be starting something yourself, which could be like, going freelance instead of working so you can have more control of your hours. Or frankly, these days, just finding a company. Many of the companies now allow people to work flexible hours from home. So now that's assuming you love what you do. if you don't love what you do, then maybe think about what do you love doing, and maybe that is like a complete career change, because we've been reading about people who do that too. And you brought up sabbatical. Like, I'm a believer in sabbaticals. I took a sabbatical when I made my decision to leave my big firm and start my own thing. So I'm all for sabbaticals. I think that if you're fortunate enough to have one from your company, you should take advantage of it. And if you don't, then you can make your own by just changing things. So it's really hard to think about what you want to do when you're in it like 24/7. So whether that's like a couple-week vacation or an actual sabbatical, depending on what your personal circumstances are, I highly recommend. It gives you a lot more clarity on like what's really important and what do you really like. But I would just say, I'm kind of trying to be an optimist, right? Like, so if I take like lemonade out of lemons, I think that so many companies are aware of this, and look, they've had to make some adaptations. I think there are a lot more options that are a lot more flexible. I think very few jobs require like 40 hours a week during set hours in a specific location away from your family and your other responsibilities. If you're in one of those, then I think there are plenty of other interesting both companies and careers that are a lot more open.
And what's your advice specifically for entrepreneurs in this uncertain economic environment? I know there's a lot of nerves out there, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, so the advice that I give the entrepreneurs that I'm fortunate enough to work with is the following, which is, so we don't control the macroeconomic environment, we never have. So have a lens and understanding of what's happening in the macro, which for entrepreneurs right now, it's really hard to raise money. So I don't know when that's going to get better, but I don't think it's going to be anytime real soon. So then you should think about, well, the money that you have today, what's the best way that you can invest it? Whether that's, if you're far enough along, becoming profitable so that you have control of your own destiny, as I say. You'll decide if and when you ever raise more money. Or if that's not possible, finding that right balance of, you know, conserving your cash to have it last as long as possible so you can grow. You know, the point is still to grow or meet your milestones, but it's a different view, right? Whereas like last year was sort of like growth at all costs, right? Now, different environment. Okay, what resources do you have today, and what's the most you can get to with what you've got today? It will get better. Even in 2000, because I lived through it, it does get better. It might be a couple of years, but it'll get better.
How does right now feel compared to 2008 or 2000?
So to me, it feels, for tech anyway, for entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley, I'm afraid I think it feels a little bit more like 2000 than 2008. So 2008 was obviously a really significant macroeconomic shock, the Great Recession. But for tech, a lot of it was focused around financial services, banking, and real estate. So the return to normalcy for capital raising and just growth for tech companies in Silicon Valley came back pretty quickly in a couple of quarters. Whereas in 2000, we were the epicenter, and some might say we are again. And so huge run up in 99, huge crash in early 2000, and it was probably a good 2 or 3 years before the capital started flowing back to tech startups. Now, realizing the run up wasn't quite as severe, as fast as it was in 99 versus now. So I think we're going to be somewhere in the middle, meaning I think it's going to be hard to raise money. Like we've seen, there's very few IPOs, for example, for this year, and I personally think most of next year, so maybe it'll be about 1.5 years or 2 years instead of 3 years. But on the other hand, the reason for optimism, especially for companies that are in tech that are earlier stage, is that the size and scale of the market opportunity is so much larger. I think when Netscape went public in 1996, the total number of internet, like people who had access to internet through browsers or computers back then, internet through dial-up or whatever else, was measured in the sort of 60 to 70 million in the whole world. And in 2020, I think the number, because many people have multiple devices, I'm sure you do, I know I do, it was something like 5 billion. Wow. So if you just think about the scale, and that's not even talking about the fundamental technology scale, right? So cloud computing, machine learning and artificial, like the technology advances. So I'm medium to long term super optimistic because like technology now, every company I think is a technology company. You read about even like car companies now are technology companies, which on the bad side we found out that was true, right, with the supply chain crisis and like when they didn't have semiconductors. So technology is just much more integrated into so many parts of the US and global economy. So that's why I'm medium to long term super excited about, you know, being fortunate to be a tech investor here in Silicon Valley. In the short term, I think that it's going to continue to be hard to raise money, right? The Fed keeps raising interest rates. Just capital is getting tighter by design. And I don't know, I'm not an expert on that. I don't know when that's going to get better. But I think the people who are building real businesses, you know, the last couple of downturns, you talked about 2008, 2009, some great companies have come out of those downturns. And I think that this current downturn will be the same.
So medium to long-term optimistic for tech investors. What about for women? We've seen, I've covered the funding statistics year over year over year, and you see a little bit of progress, a little bit of pullback. It feels a little bit like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. What's your outlook for women right now?
I'm medium term excited. I guess I've been following those statistics long enough to see that it's made some meaningful improvements. You're right, not in the last couple of years, but I go back to like 2000. So when, at least in terms of the percentage of female founders as a percentage of companies receiving some venture capital backing, that number has like doubled. The dollars have been stubbornly small and it's still only about 2%. But the reason why I'm bullish, even in the shorter term, right? 2 things. One is, when I talk to younger female entrepreneurs, it's a very different mindset than, you know, even 10 years ago. Meaning they understand the challenges, but they are much more undaunted and also see it as a potential area of strength. Great networks like Allraise, and there are networks to support one another and move things forward. That's one. And 2, I'm excited because as more women become successful executives and entrepreneurs, they start investing either as an angel investor or as an investor in venture funds like mine and others, right? And so the virtuous cycle starts to build. Like, it's long been held, like people say it's a boys, it's true, right? Like, there's a reason why people have written a lot about the PayPal mafia, and Reed is amazing, a lot of like, but there's also a reason why, like, how have they been so successful? Well, PayPal was really successful. A bunch of them leave to go start other things. They ask their friends to invest in their companies. And there's nothing nefarious about it. It just becomes a self-reinforcing network. Why I'm excited? Because I think we finally have some really amazing self-reinforcing networks of women entrepreneurs and investors. So the flywheel is beginning.
I know you've talked about being often the only woman in the room, particularly earlier in your career. And I know that's often framed as a negative thing, a very lonely thing, and it can feel very lonely. But I am wondering, were there ever moments that you felt like it was a competitive edge?
Well, you know, I tried to, early in my career, because that was the reality all throughout my 20s and 30s, I realized that it can be positive and it can be an edge. So I realized that, for example, at conferences or trade shows, or even during a fundraising process, once I realized that I might be the only woman that entrepreneur or that entrepreneurial team might meet the entire day at a conference with 30,000 people, and that they might be fundraising and going to dozens of venture capital firms, and I might be the only woman that they would meet in that process. The way I thought of it in my own mind anyway as a potential advantage was, well, if I can make a good connection with them by asking them a smart question or making a smart comment about if it was at a conference, like about their demonstration, or in a pitch meeting about their business, that when I wanted to follow up with them and I sent them an email, since I have a female presenting name, the chances that they would remember who I was out of the 50 or 100 people that they had met was actually higher. So I was like, because when you're, especially early when you're like, you know, there's dozens of young associates trying to find like the hot company and like make that impression. I was like, okay, if I can make a moderately positive to positive impression, I'm more likely to be remembered than someone who makes a similarly positive impression, because we're all wearing the same uniforms and everybody had the same first name. Like I worked at a firm with like more guys named Jim, Joe, and John than females. True fact. That was my advantage. That's what I told myself was going to be my advantage, instead of being focused on the fact that I was going to be the only woman in the room or the only woman they might meet in their entire fundraising process.
I like that. Early in my career, I was a personal finance and markets reporter, so found myself in various rooms on Wall Street and was very self-conscious of I'm the only person in the room who's wearing red, or the only woman in the room, and then I'm also wearing red on top of it. So I felt like I really stood out, and I think it made me shrink back in moments. But it sounds like you really leaned into it.
I leaned into it from that perspective, but it's funny you talked about the way you dress, because in the 90s, 2000s, you know, the VC uniform back then used to be light blue button down and some sort of khaki pants. Now it's like jeans and a hoodie because we want to look like the entrepreneurs. But anyway, so I never wore dresses. I literally like copied the uniform because I didn't want to, I was like, I'm obviously going to stand out as the only woman in the room, so I'm at least going to like try to look the part. I should look like a VC, so I should dress like the other VCs.
That's so interesting. Well, now other VCs can dress like you.
Yeah, it was a long time until I felt like I could dress like myself. I had my work wardrobe and my real wardrobe.
I think that's been an evolution for a lot of women,
Yeah.
I have to say.
I think so too.
What do you wish someone had told you about aging or being over 50 that you know now that you didn't know when you were younger?
One is that I wish someone would have told me that, so on the positive and the negative. So on the positive, I wish someone would have told me that just being more comfortable in who you are would give you a kind of confidence and self-understanding that would actually help you in your career as well. And on the not so positive, I wish someone would have told me that as you get older, the gray hair needs to be dyed more frequently. It's a lot of work. Because I think it's still true that, right, like if men go salt and pepper, they're perceived as being, you know, more serious, more gravitas. And I do think in this, you know, to your prior question about like, is it an advantage or disadvantage in venture and in tech to be older? I think in that case, it can be a disadvantage to be perceived as older, particularly if you're a female.
Well, Teresa, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It was so fun.
Through a combination of intelligence, talent, and sheer will, Mellody Hobson has worked her way up to the top ranks of American business. She's the president and co-CEO of Ariel Investments, the nation's oldest Black-owned investment fund. She also serves on a number of corporate boards, including Starbucks, where she is chair, and JP Morgan Chase. Now, Hobson's spearheading a new private equity fund alongside industry veteran Leslie Brune called Project Black. Its mission? To get more Black executives into the upper tiers of the business world by connecting them with both customers and capital.
So Project Black was an idea that was born really during all of the strife that occurred after the horrific murder of George Floyd. I had this idea, what if we could scale large minority businesses? Because the data is actually stunning. 95% of Black and brown businesses in this country have less than $5 million in revenue. At the time of all the civil unrest with George Floyd's murder, many corporations were pledging to do more business with Black and brown companies. And one of the things they said was, at that point, they were doing about 2% of their spend, $125 billion with minority businesses, but a goal of 10 to 15%, which means there's a $1 trillion opportunity. But we have this scale challenge because our businesses are so small. So I said, what if we could actually buy middle market businesses by virtue of our ownership, my word, minoritize those businesses, bring in Black and brown executives, change the nature of those businesses with their boards, with their leaders, ultimately create businesses that are the preferred vendors, tier 1 suppliers.
On February 1st, Ariel Alternatives closed its first Project Black fund with $1.45 billion in commitments from investors such as former Microsoft CEO Steve Ballmer, Walmart, Salesforce, and the Qatar Investment Authority. That's on top of an up to $200 million co-investment commitment JP Morgan made when the fund was announced. Hobson's determination to see Project Black deliver largely reflects on her character and professional reputation. She grew up the youngest of 6 to a single mother, experiencing financial hardship in her early years. But even with the odds of success stacked against her, Hobson was accepted to both Harvard and Princeton, ultimately choosing the latter. This is how she came to meet John Rogers, the founder of Ariel Investments.
I was volunteering for the Princeton Schools Committee, which is the committee that are in local communities where you're trying to make sure that local alumni are interviewing prospective students. And I was ultimately vice chairman and then chairman of the schools committee, really committed to recruiting diverse students to Princeton. And I met Mellody as a prospective student. She came to all the events I arranged for all students and for minority students. And you could see right then, she was just really special. She had so much charisma, so much energy. She was so thoughtful and smart. You know, she just shined. In this industry, you're going to have some really big ups and some really big downs. And you need a business partner who's going to stick with you through those tough times and be able to not get frightened by the short-term pain, make the tough decisions, use her judgment in the right way. And so I always say there's no one you'd want more to be in a foxhole with than Mellody Hobson.
In its 40 years, Ariel has certainly gone through tough times. The 1987 crash, the dot-com era, and the most harrowing of all, the 2008 global financial crisis. To give you an idea, the fund went from $21 billion in assets under management in 2004 to just $3.3 billion in March 2009. But the fund ultimately rebounded and has managed to continue successfully thanks to its principles. These include its contrarian buy and hold approach and reputation for active patience. With Project Black, there's a particular strategy Hobson is betting on as its keys to success.
When I was growing up through Ariel, John Rogers always used to say to me, the founder of Ariel, when people talk about Black businesses, they talk about access to capital, access to capital, access to capital. And John said to me, access to customers may be more important. Then I went on the board of JP Morgan, and I was sitting in that boardroom, and I realized very quickly, being on the board of the 8th largest bank in the world, the largest bank in America, if you have a fistful of receivables, they will lend you money. So I said, the customer is actually more important. The customer becomes the conduit to the capital. And so we stepped back and said to ourselves, we need to create a situation where the customer becomes the way to drive the change.
The total committed to Project Black is 5 times the size of the average first-time private equity fund and brings assets under management at Ariel to just above $16 billion. Project Black's first investment was made last year when it acquired just over 52% of Utah-based Sorensen Communications at an enterprise value of $1.3 billion. And already, big changes have been made. The company went from having 1 person of color in the C-suite and boardroom to 13. And the new CEO is Jorge Rodriguez, a veteran telecom exec who worked with Mexican billionaire Carlos Slim. Over the next 3 to 5 years, Project Black plans to buy and expand platforms in 6 to 10 other supplier segments, such as financial and professional services, healthcare, technology, manufacturing, and logistics.
I think it's a very simple call to action is you put your money where your mouth is. So many people say and state an intention, but coming through is actually financially doing something about it. So in corporate America, there's been so much talk about equality and diversity and equity. Show me the math. Show me the commitment of the dollars. Show me the diversity of the C-suite. Show me the diversity of the board, and I can tell you who's really serious.
You may think Bitcoin is silly, but it's just as silly as gold. We have a system in place where we know how to mine it. We pull it out of the earth. Yes, it's very dangerous. Yes, it costs human lives, but like we care about this shiny metal. And we've just agreed as a society that this is a store of value. So at a very basic minimum, when you have a store of value that you can transport out of a country, if God forbid you're under duress, you can carry this out much more easily than the gold. And so here is, in the most boring way possible, an argument for why crypto, and I mean in particular in this case Bitcoin, is good, is useful, and is here to stay. I'm Alexis Ohanian, probably best known for founding Reddit. I started the company right out of college, 2005. I returned to the company back in 2014 as executive chairman for the turnaround, and then I left for good in 2020. I was gonna be a lawyer, and then I walked out of that LSAT. It's a true story. Walked the hell out of that LSAT 20 minutes into it because I was like, this is terrible. I don't want to be here. Went to the Waffle House on 29 in Charlottesville, Virginia, sat down, got my order, and I'm sitting there and I'm just like, I can't be a lawyer. And that was where I decided. I was like, I can't do this. I quit. I was like, I'm not taking any more LSATs. Like, I'm done. And went back to my dorm and started convincing my roommate to join me in starting a company. It took like a year to convince him to join me, but I just knew I had to be an entrepreneur. These days, I'm doing my life's work at 776, which is a technology company that deploys venture capital. So I have always been what I'd like to think is a pragmatic supporter of crypto. About half of the 776 portfolio is in some way investing in crypto or blockchain technologies. When 2005, I'm starting Reddit, Web 2 was the jargony phrase. What did it mean? It really just meant that we had some new technology. Back then it was called Ajax, just some fancy JavaScript that let me design a website where you could have these up and down arrows and comments that you could click on in real time and see them change. Everyone in Web 2 was in a way following Zuck's lead, right? I think Facebook had launched maybe a year before us, and then Twitter launched a few years after us. But we were all following the same model, which was grow as fast as you can, and you'll figure it out later, which meant then eventually you'll have enough users to run ads. And I was never happy with that. It never felt good. We tried our best to build, ads that users didn't hate because they could comment on them and they could vote on them, but it always felt like an ugly hack. What I realized there was we were early and right in a lot of ways, but we had a deeply flawed business model, advertising. And Web 2 allowed for social media, allowed for user-generated content, allowed for anyone to say, hey, I've got a funny story to tell, and I think it could be just as funny as anyone else's, even though I didn't go to a journalism school or I didn't go to a writing school or whatever. And we just didn't figure out a business model that worked for it. I think having a front row seat to building Reddit, as well as building the communities of Reddit specifically, has exercised a lot of muscles around intuition for community. And as communities grew, we sort of cobbled together ways for businesses to go around it. Let's start with the community first. Let's build technology around that energy. Let's build a brand around that energy, and here we go. So back in 2012, I was working at Y Combinator, which was the same accelerator that first funded me back in 2005 when I was the CEO starting Reddit. And I remembered meeting this young man, Brian Armstrong. He had just left Airbnb. He was their head of fraud. Clearly a very smart guy. Airbnb was clearly a very successful company. And he was choosing to leave to start something new, to be the best and safest way to buy crypto online. And I thought, okay, someone this smart at a company this successful who still wants to just step away and build something he believed was gonna be his life's work, that's something I needed to lean in and learn more about. So I went to the first place you would expect, which is Reddit, and visited the r/Bitcoin community to start educating myself and to start seeing, the audience there on Reddit has always been among the earliest adopters of technology. And so not everything goes viral, not everything goes mainstream, but here was a community that was very frustrated because it was very hard to buy this cryptocurrency that they believed in. And Brian Armstrong was the first one to really put his hand up and say, I want to do this. I want to do this above board. I'm going to put my name on the website, and I want people to feel safe buying this asset. At the time, I thought it'd probably still get shut down by the government at some point. I'm sitting here reading that white paper thinking, wow, really? Like, people are gonna care about this? But there was just enough, because there were enough Redditors who already cared about it and thought, this is powerful, this is a big deal. I thought, you know what, the technology is interesting enough, the white paper is sort of intellectually sound, and there's a community of very passionate Redditors who believe in this, and if anyone's gonna do it, Brian seemed like the right one. Just very lucky to have invested that early. The technology is a medium, and I compare it to paper in a way that I think works pretty well for folks, right? Like 4,000 years ago, someone is inventing papyrus, right? And they're sitting there, and he, or probably more likely she, is like, yo, I can take a thing and write on this and give it to you, and now it's yours, right? That's pretty cool. Now, if you were to go back in time right now and explain that today paper is used for everything from, I mean, you have to explain what a script is, you have to explain what a trading card is, you have to explain what tissue paper is, you'd have to explain to them that there is a piece of paper here in the United States that is so important. We wrote down some words on it a few hundred years ago, and it's like a sacred document. And then there's actually literally a sacred document that's been printed millions of times all over the world, and it's the basis of an entire religion that people share. Like, the leaps and bounds of what this simple medium could do could not have been imagined at that time. And so now, I think in the next few years, we'll start to see some really boring applications for this technology, think of it like paper, that starts to compound in value and utility for people. Where, again, they shouldn't need to know the underlying tech. Just like they didn't need to know Ajax, they don't need to know if it's an NFT. It just needs to work, it needs to deliver a delightful experience, and that's it. If we stick to this metaphor of NFT as paper, then paper can have a cultural value, but also utility. The Michael Jordan first basketball game ticket stub is a perfect example of this, right? It is a piece of paper. It had utility a few decades ago because you knew which seat your butt went into, and when you got there, no one else was sitting there, right? That's clear utility. Today, it has cultural value because it was Michael Jordan's first game and it's worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. And those are the channels where we're gonna see the value in NFTs over these next years. In tech broadly, it's gonna be a rocky year. Wish it weren't the case, but I think it's gonna be a rocky year. And CEOs are gonna be looking at a very different scenario for their next fundraise than ever before, or at least that I've seen. 08, 09 was probably the best comp. I was at Y Combinator at the time, and watching companies like Stripe and Airbnb get started in that mess was so inspiring, because those CEOs and those companies were so lean and so mean and had to earn every user and every dollar and were rejected 100 times by investors, but it made them so much stronger and so much more formidable. And so the thing we've been impressing upon our founders, frankly, since the end of last year, is that this is the time to really, really pursue this kind of excellence within your org. It's not about squandering money. It's not about chasing, radical valuations. It's about delighting your users, shipping, building a performance culture in your org. And the good news is, we're still a young firm ourselves, and we're living a lot of these values ourselves. The companies in the portfolio are still quite young. And then the founders we're meeting now, and I really believe in the next year or two, are gonna be hardened in a very different way. And as much pain as this economic uncertainty is unfortunately gonna create, that same pain will create some tremendous companies to get started. And I'm hopeful for those, because we need those companies. We need those companies to further push us in space tech and climate tech and software, and yes, even crypto. I've lived through a lot of cycles now, a lot of crypto winters, and every single winter I actually relish the chance, because you're spending time with real builders who are sober and focused. The first time CEO that I meet today, who's 21, fresh out of college, just like I was, are so much smarter than I was. And not just in the obvious way that every generation, you would hope, right, 2 decades later is much smarter, They are much more wise because they are the first generation to have grown up in this era, in this age, using it every day, seeing it how it affected them in school, seeing it how it affected them. I think every generation feels this. I think they will undo, or at a minimum, learn from a lot of the mistakes that we made. And I am here to help them as much as possible. I feel very fortunate to see now in the last 2 years the progress and the success and all the good fortune we've had. Just makes me think like, I mean, in a way it makes me think, gosh, why didn't I do this sooner? But I'm happy to be in the place I'm in right now, and it's been fun and it's incredibly satisfying. And I have a kid who I promised 2 years ago when I resigned the way I did in protest from Reddit that I was going to do everything I could to not just keep doing my best professionally, but do so in a way that was going to make her proud one day and make her want to, you know, obviously she's got a mother to be very proud of, but I'm competitive and I want her to be just as proud of me too. Folks for years would be like, hey, Reddit, I love Reddit, Reddit. And then for a while it was, I love your wife. They still do that. Every now and then it's like, I love Olympia, which is nice, but a little weird. But it was the first time a few months ago someone said, hey, I love Angel City FC, thank you so much. And that felt great. And it would make me so happy if that were my legacy. The focus right now is 776. Angel City happens to be a part of that. But I'm in a very fortunate place right now. The firm's only 2 years old, but the success we've had, the tailwinds, everything has been, it feels like this energy has been compounding in such magnificent ways. And yes, we do early stage investing. I get to spend a lot of my time building product that helps our team work fully remotely, helps us support our founders better than anyone in the game. And, you know, I started a foundation. I didn't call it the Ohanian Family Foundation because that was lame. I called it the 776 Foundation because it's a better brand. And started building my philanthropic legacy. The rest of my life is going to be spent deploying capital, whether it is for profit on the venture side, and we'll do it better than anyone, or philanthropically on the foundation side. And I hope we can do that obviously also better than anyone. And that's it. That's what I want the Google search results to be. And maybe Olympia's dad. That'd be cool too.
Hi, everybody. I'm Diane Brady. I'm here with my colleague, Chase Peterson-Withorn, who is on the Wealth team, and we're talking about the Billionaires list. Hey, Chase, who's the richest person in the world? I was going to say man. Shame on me. That's sexist.
Well, you know, it has only ever been a man. So you know, we'll see. I think there's still a little bit
Dare
of
to
time.
dream.
So the richest person in the world is Bernard Arnault. It's his first year as the richest person on the Forbes Billionaires list. And it's the first time that a French citizen has been number one on the Forbes Billionaires list. And so Arnault is the sort of driving force behind LVMH, which is an enormous sort of fashion retail giant that owns
Louis
Vuitton,
Vuitton,
Dior,
Moet Chandon,
tons
right?
Of big brands like that.
Yep. Well, he's been in this battle with Elon Musk for, well, he personally hasn't been in the battle, but we've been watching them trade back and forth for a while. And so he kind of propelled into that first place. Was it largely because of Elon dropping so much, or did he actually gain a lot of wealth in the last year?
Yeah, it was a little bit of both. So it was a very good year for Bernard Arnault. Shares of LVMH are up quite a bit. They're near record highs. Revenues are sort of setting records. Profits are setting records. And so he gained more money than anybody else in the world over the past year. So his net worth increased by $53 billion. So he's worth $211 billion now. But he had a $53 billion year, which is better than anybody else has had. But that alone, will get you a lot of the way toward beating somebody like Elon Musk. But he was also helped by the fact that Musk sort of shot himself in the foot over the past year when he bought Twitter at this huge valuation before tech markets crashed, and a lot of Tesla investors, of course, have been concerned over how much Tesla stock he's sold to fund the purchase and how much time he's spent on Twitter and running Twitter and trying to fix Twitter and wring money out of Twitter over the past year. So Musk is down $39 billion
Wow.
over the last year. So
I think he
Arnault had a
lost
great
100
year.
billion
And
last
Musk,
year.
yeah, and Musk had a bad year, and so that translates to a really great year for Arnault.
So I want to ask about the rest of the list, but before we do that, I know you're not an expert in all things luxury, but you just talked about the fact that we all know there has been certainly a downturn in tech. We're seeing headwinds, we like to call them, in the economy. Why would somebody like Bernard Arnault gain $53 billion in wealth? What was propelling him? Do you know by any chance?
Yeah, well, I mean, consumers over the past year have definitely continued to buy stuff, and despite sort of rising inflation and a lot of fears about recessions, there have been a lot of people buying stuff, and of course, there have especially been a lot of really wealthy people buying a lot of really expensive stuff, and that's the sort of stuff that Bernard Arnault sells, and so that's why they sort of had a banner year.
That's true. Maybe a 2-tier or several tier economy. So talk about the rest of the top 10. I would presume, given what's happened in tech, that's where we saw a lot of the losses. Is that fair to say? And crypto, perhaps?
Tech billionaires were hit pretty hard over the past year. 254 people dropped off the billionaires list, and a lot of them were sort of from the tech world. And even within the top 10, the very upper ranks of the billionaire ranks, a couple of notable people dropped off just out of that 10, and they were the Google founders, Larry Page and Sergey Brin. And sort of in their place, they were replaced by Michael Bloomberg, the former mayor of New York, who had a great year for his financial services business. They have terminals that sort of power Wall Street, and Carlos Slim, who is a Mexican telecom billionaire, and shares of his companies are doing well. So
also in the media
sort of
business,
rough
right?
year for tech.
I said Carlos Slim. So being in the media is not such a bad business for some people, I guess. So
yeah,
Slim,
not necessarily. But the thing is, and with Bloomberg too, a lot of people who are in media, these guys who are in media, they're in other things too. Bloomberg makes a lot of money, not off of
all
of
about
media.
the terminal. It's true.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the they've just come onto the list. Is the middle the usual suspects? Is that pretty stable? I was going to say stagnant.
So so the top 10, definitely is a lot of the usual suspects. The order has sort of shifted a little bit. Of course, Arnault overtaking Musk, but then of course you have huge names like Musk, but also Jeff Bezos, Larry Ellison, Warren Buffett is fifth, Bill Gates is sixth, and then you have Mukesh Ambani, who has regained his title as the richest person in Asia, in part, a large part, just because Gautam Adani has very famously, in recent months, sort of been flaming out after, there have been some questions about, the improprieties sort of in his empire.
What fascinates me is we've seen people like Warren Buffett and Gates be ardent philanthropists for decades, and yet they still seem to be the richest people in the world. And Bill Gates had a divorce. I guess Microsoft's just having a really, really good year, but I'm surprised that doesn't really seem to dent him too much from the top tier.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because actually, Microsoft is not having a great year, but Gates, there's sort of a couple things that sort of work in his favor. One of them is, he's diversified a lot into a ton of other stocks. Of course, he owns a lot of Berkshire Hathaway, but he owns tons of other, companies and private investments, and it is many people's full-time job to manage Bill Gates' money.
Yeah.
But so that's one part. But the other part is just that he has so much money that even you can be down a lot and you can still be really wealthy. Jeff Bezos is the third richest person in the world on this list. He also lost more money than anybody last year.
Plus he lost his divorce,
$7 billion, and he's still the third richest person in the world. So for someone like Gates, it definitely helps to have big numbers to start with. And so you can go through a divorce like Bezos did too, and you can give incredible sums of money away, and your net worth, might still continue to grow just because, having great wealth breeds more wealth.
Now, is it emblematic of what we see on the rest of the list, or is the top 10, kind of a unique collection of characters, many of whom are really dominant in their home markets? For example, India comes to mind, Mexico for Slim, but is it emblematic of the kind of, mix that we see in the rest of the list? It's a massive list, by the way.
It definitely is. I think on the one hand, any billionaire is pretty dominant in whatever market they sort of operate in, just by the nature of
That's true.
of sort of being this big of a player. And of course, there's nothing normal in a lot of ways about a lot of these people. They've had outsized success, and to get there, interesting things. They have interesting perspectives on the world and move in interesting ways. But the top 10 is even among all of these outliers, the top 10 are sort of huge outliers. You talk about the 1%, and the billionaires are, the 1% of the 1%. And the top 10 on the billionaires list is the 1% of the 1% of, sort of thing. I think it's, these 10 people are worth $1.2 trillion overall. That's 10 people who are worth $1.2 trillion. I just, I did the math, and it works out to where 0.4% of the list, 10 people out of 2,640 billionaires, have 10% of the wealth of the entire list. So even, there's a lot of income inequality and wealth inequality, even among the super wealthy people.
Some billionaires are bigger than others. Now, this sounds like a bit of an oddball question, but I'm curious about where they're domiciled. Like, if Arnault is in France, that famously is has a high sort of, let's just call it a regime where one would get taxed on their wealth. Is he based in France, even though his business is based in France?
Yeah, and some of the there certainly are billionaires on the list who have moved around to lower tax places. Famously in the United States, people like Ken Griffin have moved, from Illinois to Florida, that sort of thing. And people, of course, have moved different countries as well, and have sort of given up their U.S. citizenship or citizenship of certain countries. Looking for. There's a lot of billionaires who live in Monaco, for example. So there definitely is a good amount of that. But there really are a pretty high number of billionaires who still live and work and operate and run their businesses in the countries where they hail from. And so Arnault, is in France. Obviously all these big names in the U.S. still live in the U.S. and plenty of them, even spend a lot of time or live in California, places like that. There are other strategies, I think, sometimes that these billionaires employ where they don't necessarily have to leave the country to maybe lower their taxes or something like that.
That's true.
And of course, they might also want to.
Capital is global. There are no borders.
Too.
No borders for capital. It's very true. So one other question for you, which is, you've been doing this for a while. I don't know whether it's through technology or transparency laws. Is it becoming easier or harder to value the wealth of these folks? I know you can, if somebody has publicly traded shares, you can look at the share price, and that's a major factor. But there are many other things that go into valuing wealth. And I'm curious, is it the same as it's always been, or are you finding it's changing how easily it is to?
That's a great question. I would say that it's largely the same difficult task that it's been, but the reasons for that are always changing. And in some ways it's getting easier. Of course, private markets over the last decade plus, especially, that I've been working on this, have started to resemble public markets in certain ways. You have a lot of companies staying private for longer, but they raise money and they're marked by institutional funds. And, there are a lot of, you can look at secondary market sales,
right,
to the point now where, a lot of private sort of unicorns are operating and trading shares, pretty frequently like a public company. So in that sense, there's, that makes things a little bit easier to track. But on the other hand, these billionaires often don't want you to look under the hood, and they're constantly finding clever ways and different ways to filter their money, move it around, try to hide it, or just coming up with just new, tax strategies to lower their tax bill, and new sort of holding companies and sort of trust structures and things like that are just sort of constantly changing. And so I don't know that I would say that it's gotten harder or easier. I think it's a difficult task, and it's a huge investigative project that our team does. And I think that of course, as we do it more and more, you get better and better at it, and you learn more stuff and build more sources and all of that. But it's hard to keep up with billionaires and all of the people that they employ to sort of
That's
manage
true.
their money.
It takes a village,
wise,
literally.
secret and tax efficient ways.
Anything else you'd want to say in terms of what struck you, surprised you about this list? Anything, but it must help you see around the corner somewhat when you're looking at some of the bets they're taking as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think sort of the biggest takeaways are really just that, there are fewer billionaires this year than there were last year, and they're worth less than they were last year. So, the billionaires, we found 2,640 of them, 2,668 last year, and they're worth $500 billion less than they were worth last year. And last year was a down year too. And so it's pretty rare to have 2 down years in a row for billionaires. There's a lot of sort of inertia that wealthy people, money breeding money and the rich getting richer. There's a lot of truth to that. And so when you have a couple down years in a row, it does sort of strike you that, markets really aren't as enthusiastic maybe as they were a couple of years ago. And billionaires are maybe more conservative than they were a couple of years ago. And, you see fears of recessions and things like that. And, it definitely is notable when you see even the wealthy are sort of, I don't want to say running for the hills, but there's certainly
the biggest
a lot
canaries,
of
the biggest canaries in the coal
feeling
mine.
the pain, as much as they can, I guess, a little bit more than they were a couple of years ago, for sure.
Great. Well, that as it should be. So we will watch them to see where the economy's going. And always good to talk to you, Chase. Congratulations on another big project.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks so much for having me.
The heavy hitters, and we've got one of the great ones from Kenya. Julius, thanks for coming.
Thank you.
All right, so there are 3. At Forbes we do 3 kinds of when you have kind of those rags to riches sagas. We kind of sometimes we have like the stories of orphans. Other times maybe it's somebody they were poor or homeless, or they were a refugee or an immigrant, but you're like all of those things, which is very, which makes your rise even more impressive. So how much of this?
Thank you.
Yes, maybe take us on again on your journey, because it's a real inspiring story. And by the way, wherever you come from, I want to preface this: you can be super successful because we have somebody like that right here. But maybe. Give us a walk.
Thank you so much, Randall, and I'm delighted to be here with the Forbes Africa event, Under 30 Summit. Yeah, thank you, Excellency the President and the First Lady for hosting us. Your Excellency the First Lady of Guinea-Bissau. Yeah, my able, His Excellency the Deputy President of Kenya, who is with us here, the Deputy President of Namibia, Minister for Nigeria. Thank you very much, the entire delegation for Forbes for coming here. Yeah, and I grew up in Kenya. On the western part of Kenya, near Lake Victoria. Yeah, and I went to school, and I went to college. I went to military there in Kenya. I was in the Air Force, and then I went to America. Yeah, so when I went to America, it was during 9/11. It was during 9/11. And during 9/11, September 11 happened, and there was issue with security. There was a financial security issue, and I came up with a technology. I think I should get. Excuse me. Yeah, mic check. Yeah.
We need a new technology.
Exactly. Yeah. So I invented. So I invented a technology that was a biometric technology, and I was a pioneer in the world for biometrics. So I invented biometric technology used to secure online transactions. Yeah, in the banks in the United States. Yeah, and when I did that, I built my company. My company name was SBA Technologies. Yeah, so it was built up, and of course it became one of the largest biometric companies in the world. Yeah, so we expanded our technology over the world, and by the end of the decade, by 2008, our company had grown into a multi-billion-dollar company in America. Yeah, so we decided, we said, hey, you know, I grew up in Africa, I grew up in Kenya, I want to go back and give back to community in Kenya, give back to the community in Africa. Yeah, so we took $4 million invested into a feasibility study with a US company, a big US company. We wanted to invest in our community in Western Kenya, you know, to be able to grow it, yeah, you know, up. So we spent about $2 billion. So feasibility showed that we needed a $2 billion city, a medical and technology city that will be able to stop people in Africa from going to India every year for medical treatment. And so we built up, you know, Mwale Medical and Technology City. Yeah, it's built around 5,000 capacity. Yeah, you know, medical complex. Yeah, has a power plant. Yeah, you know, has shopping and dining, has an innovation park. Yeah, you know, and integrated, you know, within the community. So it's an integrated community.
The level set, when you say you built a city, like, was there a small city that, was this from scratch, or did you take a kind of a city that was kind of small and made it big? Or
exactly. So this is a village. This is a village in Western Kenya. And so what we did in this village with our IP, we went in this village, and then, you know, we took, you know, an African village, and then, of course, you know, be able to upgrade its infrastructure system. Yeah, so we put in roads. We did about 150 kilometers of tarmac roads, you know, in this village area. Yeah, we did over 3,000 solar street lights, you know, in the city. And then we took the community that was there. It's in a county called Kakamega County. So we took the community that was there and upgraded their homes. Yeah, you know, so there are 35,000 people living in that area. So we upgraded their homes, and they partnered with us in the city. And then, you know, they became, you know, landlords for the workers of our city. So we never moved them out. So the price of land grew from about $1,500 an acre to now over $100,000 an acre for these families. So, you know, they became the new African middle class. Thank you.
The kind of going back, you know, it feels like where you came from is driving what you're doing now.
Yeah.
When you first were an entrepreneur, because I want to talk about the city, but I want to talk about it in the context of kind of, you know, philosophically why you do it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you know, one thing, you know, and I think it's worth, you know, when you were, you know, an entrepreneur in America, but again, you were an immigrant, you didn't have like a big network or anything. You had to just do, how were you able to start something so big when you didn't have, you know, you didn't have money,
Mm-hmm.
you didn't have, you know, no resources, no connections.
Yeah, yeah.
So for anybody out there who's like, well, I want to be, you know, I want to be like Julius, but I'm just me, you know, how do you do that? How do you make that leap?
Yes. So what I did is, excuse me. Hello.
Number 3. Fix
Hello.
it.
Hello.
Boom,
Okay.
fixed.
Okay.
That's what entrepreneurs,
Yeah.
they fix things.
So what I did is that I decided, you know, first of all, it didn't tell you, so I was a homeless person in New York City when I went there initially. So I was living in a homeless shelter in New York City. And, you know, when 9/11 happened, I was in this homeless shelter, and I saw the Twin Towers come down. And so when I left the shelter, you know, I started, you know, coming up with research.
This is only 20 years ago, by the way,
Exactly.
so-
This is about 22 years ago.
Yeah.
22 years ago.
So you're homeless in a shelter on 9/11 in New York.
Yes, yes. Exactly.
Here we are.
And so the idea comes to me, you know, the towers are coming down, and, you know, there's a political upheaval in New York, and, you know, every business is living in the city. And they were like, you know, the financial system of the city is going to get under attack. And, you know, someone has to do something about it. Yeah, so I made a proposal, yeah, to the local senator, you know, for New York. The name was Hillary Clinton at the time. And you know, the proposal was that, you know, we can protect our financial system by having 2 levels of authentication. So we could have the username and password, and then we could have a second level where you have an image, a picture, or you can have, you know, a biometric, and mine was biometric. Yeah, so the senator took the proposal to Congress, yeah, you know, and it was passed in Congress in 2004, and it became effective as law in the United States in 2006, and my technology, yeah, became the golden standard, yeah, for multi-factor authentication in America.
Well, what I love about that is that, so you were you had an engineering background, yeah?
Yes.
Is that your resources were in between your ears here. You
Exactly.
had the idea, and
Yes.
you'd had the training.
Exactly.
You didn't have the connections, but you had the idea, and you were able to, and then 20 years later, here we are.
Exactly.
So that I think that's my takeaway from your story,
Yeah,
which is
yeah.
that if you have the smarts and you have the training, you can find a way, and you did find a way.
Exactly.
So then with that, so then when you say, okay, well, I'm going to come back to Kenya.
Yeah.
First, why come back to Kenya? I mean, here you are, being incredibly successful in America, the American dream.
Yeah, yeah.
You're the immigrant, and you make it in America.
Exactly.
Why come back to Kenya?
Exactly. So I was born in Kenya, and I was born in Africa. And we see ourselves as the leaders for the future. And I'm a business leader. I'm one of the global business leaders in Africa. So I was like, let me go back to my community. Yeah, give people an opportunity. Give people an opportunity to be able to get the same opportunities that I've gotten, within, my training and within my career. And so I decided to basically kind of do this feasibility study, put $2 billion to build this city. So we put $2 billion to build this city. The city opened in 2019, and we have this big hospital there that is treating patients from the county. The county is 2 million people. Yeah, 2 million people in this county. We're treating them without paying any copay or any money to get treated in our hospital. If they have a system that our vice president has done, it's called the National Hospital Insurance Fund. So if they have National Hospital Insurance Fund, they get free treatment. So they come to a hospital, they get treated for free. I have my head of that system, Patricia, sitting here in the crowd. Yeah, and these are Kenyans born, raised in Western Kenya, and they're the ones running, this system, to be able to do that.
So what's the goal of the city? What's your long-term vision?
Yeah, long-term vision. So if you look at Africa and you look at Kenya, so we have this continental free trade agreement. And what we need to grow Africa, we need what we call IP, intellectual property. So this city is an integrated master development plan. So what it did is that it integrated the local community into the entire city, into the entire plan that we've done. And so what we've done here is that we want to take this to the continent. So we've taken it so far to Democratic Republic of Congo, Cameroon, Ghana, Sierra Leone, Zambia, and now we're doing Mozambique. So there are 18 locations in 12 cities in Africa that, we have, about 5 million acres of land under now our management and control in Africa, that we're expanding this project and this city, all over the continent.
So it's a scale model.
Exactly. It's a scale model. And we're looking at, from the World Bank data, about 100 million Africans are going to be out of extreme poverty by 2035 with a free trade agreement. And for those, 70 million of those will be new jobs, spending about $500 billion in income that is going to come in with Africa Free Trade Agreement. And we are very, very proud to be here in Botswana, Your Excellency, and we want to get started with a new city here, a new medical and technology city here in Botswana. Yeah.
Well, that's exciting. By the way, if you're as successful here as you are, your city in Kenya, you have 2 million people and they all have free healthcare. That's the entire country of Botswana. So,
yes,
that is scale.
Yes,
that's scale. How do you mentioned impact, and again, I asked a similar question to Moduji, which is, do you see, how do you balance how you create, now what you're doing is, your city it's not philanthropy, it's a business practice.
Exactly.
But yet you're creating incredible, good outcomes
Exactly.
there. How do you weigh philanthropy versus kind of business impact, business investment?
Exactly. So integrated business in Africa, the model. Yeah. So what we do is that we let people that live within the county, these are 2 million people. So if you come in for treatment and you have that card, which is the National Hospital Insurance Fund, issued by government, you get free treatment. But the bigger part of that business is medical tourism. So, we are bringing in medical tourists from the entire East African region. And we came to draw people from here in Botswana, to be able to come there for treatment. Yeah, so we're getting 400 million people in this region for East Africa that used to go to India for medical treatment, and there were about 180,000 of these people going to India every year, spending billions and billions of shillings. And so we've ended, that overflow of people going for treatment in India, so they're going to come and get treatment, within the area. And we're expanding this, hospital to 82 new locations through telehealth. Yeah, so we're working on telehealth with big American partners, to expand it, in Kenya and then outside the Kenya to African continent to make sure that Africa, because this is going to be the largest hospital in the world, here in Africa, employing, 2,000 doctors, 5,000 nurses, and, about 12,000 support staff. So this is a big investment in healthcare, making Kenya and making Africa to become, healthcare, Mecca and medical city, within the world.
And it has to be. I mean, anybody who's been to China, you see the scale. I mean, there's no such thing as one building. When they build one building, it's like, let's do 5 exactly like it next to each other, because, they've got about the same population as the continent of Africa, but if we're going to solve these problems, you have to think big like that. All right, so let's go 20 years ago, you're a homeless, in a homeless shelter, and now 20 years later, you're building cities across Africa. Where do you see 20 years from now what you're doing?
Yeah, 20 years from now, so we see Africa has about, is going to have about a quarter of the global population. Its population will double by 2050. And where we see ourselves, in 2050, we see ourselves being able to move about 800 million people on this continent out of poverty. 800 million people in Africa out of poverty by creating, jobs, over the continent. And look at the opportunities we have in Africa today. Yeah, so we have the Africa Free Trade Agreement. And this free trade agreement, what it's done is that, it's worked in 3 phases of implementation. So we have trade and goods, and the second phase is the IP, intellectual property, and that's where we have expertise. We are taking the IP of our city and then expanding this IP, all over the continent. And the third will be e-commerce. So when we get there by 2043, the implementation of that, we're expecting, this continent to be the leading continent in the world in population, in development, and in growth. And we are in the driver's seat leading that now, and we want the Forbes team and the entire continent of Africa and the world, to be able to join us into that.
All right, can we do that 20 years from now? Let's do it.
Thank you.
Last question, we're out of time. Listen, I met your children.
Yes.
They're unbelievable. You've got 5 brilliant kids. They're brilliant.
Thank you.
What, we got a lot of brilliant, younger entrepreneurs here. What, if you had to kind of give them one lesson, so because if they look up and say, well, how do I become that? What's the one lesson?
Yeah, the one big lesson, if you're studying something or you want to be able to develop something in Africa or the world, it's you have to have a vision. You have to look into the vision and look into the future. And then, you focus on the vision and you get it through. You see it through with, building around the community, building around a cause that supports, the entire population in the world, not just your own cause. For example, people ask me, I saw you with Mohammed here, talking about how you're billions and Forbes does billion list and all that. If Forbes put me on a billion list, I'll sue Forbes. I'll take him, to jail to be able to do that. My wealth is how many people are moving out of poverty. Like, that's my billion. How many people are moving out of poverty? Not how many billions I have in the bank and all that. And that's my focus being a man of God. I want young people to have a vision. Anybody with a vision, whether you're young and old, you focus on that vision, you'll be able to build the world.
I love it. Well, let's do it. We got 1,000 young entrepreneurs here.
Yeah.
And if each of you can do what Julius has done, you've solved everything here. So that's it. So think big. And have that vision. We have a visionary here, Julius Mwale. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much. Thanks so much.
I think it's obviously important to have ability and talent, but I give more weight to determination, ambition, and obsession in what you do.
My name is Toto Wolff, and I'm the CEO and team principal of the Mercedes AMG Petronas Formula One team.
Toto Wolff is one of the most successful figures in auto racing, but before he was in auto racing, he was an entrepreneur. When Toto Wolff founded March 15, he had no money, and ultimately his way of building the business was he would go to these small burgeoning internet companies and basically say, hey, I'll find you financing, and in exchange, give me equity. He did that with a number of companies and scored some pretty big wins, like SMS provider UCP and game publisher Joe Wood. After that, he returned to his first love, racing, and also he started managing junior drivers. And this got him connected with a company called HWA AG, which was an engine provider for Mercedes' lower level racing teams. And eventually he got involved, bought 49%, and helped take them public in what ended up being a $175 million IPO.
I was born and raised in Vienna, Austria, and I wanted to be a racing driver.
A Formula One race is all about speed and performance, and what I love in the sport is that the stopwatch never lies. You know immediately whether I've done a good enough job, and I learned my most important business lessons in racing when I was competing at the age of 18. Without having funds, you need to raise sponsorship, and that was pretty difficult. So when I progressed into Formula One as a team owner in Williams, I understood how important it was as a private team to raise the necessary funds to be competitive and eventually win races.
I think being a racing driver is also about fitting in the car, and since I've grown very tall in my early 20s, quite late, it wouldn't have been anyway easy to race in Formula One because the cars are so small.
I became team principal of Mercedes with a weird coincidence because I was a co-owner of the Williams Formula One team, and it was going quite well. We won a race in 2012. Top management in Mercedes asked me to assess why their team wasn't going that well, and I tried to assess to the best of my ability, and they offered me the job. And that was a huge honor to run the Mercedes motorsport activities, but I said to them that I've always been an entrepreneur and I have a stake in Williams.
So they gave him an opportunity to invest in the team that was originally set to be 40%. Ultimately, it ended up being 30%, and Niki Lauda ended up investing 10% as well, and later on he raised his stake to 33%.
We've won 8 consecutive championships in Formula One, but probably the proudest moment that I had was in 2014 when we finished first and second, and the other team, Williams, where I was still a shareholder, finished third and fourth. And that was at the track where I started racing with no money, and finding myself 25 years later winning and placing the cars in the top 4 position was a super important moment and made me really happy. I think if you work in Formula One, you need to cope with pressure. And for me personally, it's almost like my comfort zone. I like the intensity of the race weekend and of the whole season.
Whether it's investment banking or racing, it's highly competitive. And therefore, you need to try to understand as good as you can and then perform to your best levels.
When you meet Toto Wolff, one of the first things that stands out is how magnetic he is. He seems to command attention when he enters a room, and also he's extremely charismatic. He's obsessed with perfection, and he's also really precise, which even spills over into his daily life.
I'm traveling to 24 races a year with more than 500 hours of flying, so I need to stay disciplined in terms of sleep, nutrition, and my life pattern. So I'm always eating the same things for breakfast, for lunch, and in the evening, trying not to upset my system, and wherever I am, I'm eating the same things. And for breakfast, it's pumpernickel bread, 2 slices, heavily toasted, so it's like a cracker, butter, a slice of ham and a tomato on top, and all of that with a cappuccino and a sparkling water.
When he believes something, he says it, and he's not afraid to own his failures or, take credit for his successes.
I think what made us successful and sustainably successful over the last 10 years was our culture and our values. We are brutally honest with each other, whilst having created a safe environment where you can speak up, where you can point to inefficiencies and improve. It is all about integrity and honesty, and I'd rather give up a championship than failing to these values. Formula One has always been the largest global sport that races every single year. Real success for me is to have a happy family. I have a great marriage and 3 wonderful children, and that is the cornerstone of me being. So long thereafter comes my professional life, and that is being successful with the racing team, winning world championships and creating a structure and a team that is sustainably successful.
One of the things that's really helped me a lot is I love solving problems. And I believe, in engineering, you can always solve a problem. And I think that's actually true in business as well. My name is Lisa Su, and I'm CEO of AMD.
Lisa Su is the CEO of AMD. She's an MIT PhD, she's a Taiwanese immigrant, and she really saved this historic Silicon Valley company, bringing it back from the dead and making it one of the most important chip companies in the industry.
I was born in Taiwan and I came to the US when I was 2 with my parents. And growing up, my father used to quiz me with math tables at the dining room table. So that's how I first got into math. And when I was young, I liked to actually take things apart. My brother had a toy remote-controlled car and it stopped working. And I was wondering, why did it stop working? And so I opened it up, tried to see what was going on, and there was like a wire that was loose, and we were able to get it back working again by putting it back together. I went to the Bronx High School of Science in New York, and I was surrounded by people who loved math and science and technology. I will say there was a part of me that wanted to be a concert pianist, but I don't think I was good enough to do that, so I ended up being an engineer. What I was really inspired by when I was a freshman at MIT is I went into a semiconductor line for the first time, and I saw how you made chips, and that was just so cool to me. That's really how I ended up being in semiconductors, having a summer job when I was a first-year college student. I was at IBM in the mid-90s. We were working at the forefront of semiconductor devices. Semiconductors were so interesting to me. I mean, I love the idea that you could, really make something that works. All of these transistors, these tiny little things that you could really put together in a chip. And so we worked on some of the newest innovations, things like copper interconnects, and new ways to make devices faster and less power and denser. In those days, people always said, is Moore's law ending? Are we not going to be able to make devices smaller? And so much of the challenge was how could we keep increasing performance and increasing capability while also making these devices smaller so we could put more transistors on a single chip. So that was the key thing, and we had a great team that was working on that. I joined AMD in 2012. I always knew about AMD as an important company in the industry, and it was an opportunity to work on a bigger platform. So I was very interested in joining AMD. There are a lot of things happening at that point in time. There was this whole revolution of where were PCs going, what was happening in mobile phones, what was going to be the next big tech going on. So I wanted to be at a company that really would work at the bleeding edge of technology.
When Sue came into the role, she had this really gargantuan task ahead of her. The company's stock had plummeted, a quarter of the workforce had been laid off, and she's really been able to pull off one of the greatest turnarounds in Silicon Valley history. Sue really boiled down her turnaround strategy to 3 things: building great products, focusing on customer relations, and the third thing is simplifying the company. So focusing on strengths like PC chips and data centers.
In the early days when I joined AMD, it was actually about getting customers and large partners to trust us and trust that we could develop the best technology in the world and that they could trust their roadmaps and their business with our technology. What I would say is, look, it's going to take us 5 years, but we will be best in class in the industry, and we're going to do it in these 3 steps with our new Zen architecture and our new microprocessors. And so it really is about a track record and doing what you say you're going to do and ensuring that we meet our commitments.
The people who know her also point to this unique mix of technical ability and people skills. And that's kind of what's driven her success. Being able to bring people together, problem solve, and focus on more than just the business.
What I've really enjoyed about being an engineer is really building products. That's what I love in life. It's really, how do you build great products? How do you see where your products go and, really make the world a better place? And the role of a CEO, that's one piece of it. That's not all pieces of it. We have many stakeholders. We have our employees, we have our board, our shareholders, our partners. And so it's really balancing not just the technology, but also balancing and ensuring that, we are really meeting all of our stakeholders' expectations. The thing about semiconductors and developing chips is you really do have to make bets 3 to 5 years in advance, and you have to think about, okay, where is the industry going, and how are we going to bring sort of new ideas to an industry that really has lots and lots of great companies and lots of smart people. So at AMD we spend a lot of time thinking about where is technology going in the future, what's going to be really important, what are the limiting factors, and how do we do something that nobody else can do. I've been in the semiconductor industry for the last 30 years, and sort of in the beginning people didn't really understand what semiconductors were for. They were kind of like underneath the surface. You knew something about chips and something about computers, but not exactly why they were important. I think what's been amazing over the last few decades, and especially even over the last 3 or 4 years, people now understand that semiconductors are essential. Like, you need chips in everything that you do, in every part of your life, in every part of the business, in every part of how we deliver, great healthcare and, great technology and great capabilities. And I think that's what makes it cool, is that, semiconductors are now something that everyone thinks about as being super important for our daily lives. We love seeing our products and technologies really make a difference in everyone's lives. I'm not sure I'm ready to talk about legacy. I think we have a lot to do right now to continue pushing the envelope on technology. Touching billions of people with AMD technology would be a wonderful thing.
Well, thank you very much, and we've got a very distinguished guest here this morning. Ray Dalio is one of those individuals who's not only one of the greatest investors of our time, but he also is an individual who also realized, and we're going to discuss it, that what Mark Twain said was right. Mark Twain once said, history may not repeat itself, but it rhymes. And Ray, why don't you start off? You have always been interested in investing, but then in 1971, you were a clerk at the exchange. Nixon goes on TV on Sunday. Tell us what happened then and what you learned.
Okay, well, I'm clerking on the floor of the exchange, 1971. President Nixon announces to the world that the United States is defaulting on its obligation to take that paper that they have, which was like checks in a checkbook, and give them the gold.
Close the gold window.
Close the gold window. So he defaulted on the obligation to pay the money because the gold was running down. They didn't have enough, and it was like a bank run. So I walk onto the exchange floor expecting...
You went early because you thought...
Yeah. I expect that there's going to be a chaos and things would be bad. And the stock market went up the most in decades. And I didn't understand it. And that's because that was the first time a devaluation happened. I never went through one of those. And I studied history, and I found the exact same thing happened on March 5th, 1933, except it was with Roosevelt and a radio rather than a TV. And the exact same thing. And the stock market went up a lot. And so what I learned, and I had this repeatedly in my life, that things that surprised me often surprised me because they didn't happen in my lifetime, but they happened many times in history. So for example, by studying that the 1920s to the 1945 period, I saw that I understood the nature of the 2008 financial crisis. When we anticipated the 2008 financial crisis, because what happens when you have a lot of debt and interest rates at zero? How does that work? And that dynamic is what happened in 2008. And so it's very much emphasized in my mind how in order to understand things that never happened in my lifetime, I have to study history. And there were three major things. There are three major things that are now happening in our lifetime that didn't happen other than you'd have to go back in history. Those three things are we're producing an enormous amount of debt, particularly government debt, but a lot of debt and monetizing that in amounts that you would have to go back to the 1930 to 45 period. Number two, we have a level of internal conflict the largest wealth gaps since back then, the largest internal conflict and populism of the left and the right in our country and at war. And a populist is an individual who will not accept losing. They'll win at all cost. So that dynamic is new. You have to go back really to the 30s around the world or before. And the third is the great power conflict. In other words, the rise of a great power in the form of China that is a comparable power in the world, and that dynamic. So in order to see that, I needed to then study the past 500 years of history. Now, I know people think it's odd because here I am. I'm just trying to make money in the markets. I'm a practical guy dealing with that. But we would not understand that. And the picture of the world is a very different picture than we have grown used to because of the nature of these longer term cycles.
So you studied 10 empires, 4 in particular relevance to us, the Dutch, the British, the US, and China. And you have come to the conclusion that there are these empires are great powers, go through cycles, and as you say, even though times and circumstances have changed, the cycles don't. And be prepared, even though it has not happened in your lifetime, big disruptive things can happen.
Well, I think it's not adequate to just assume that because it happened in the past that it's going to happen, or the cycles. What the cycles do is they shine light on the cause-effect relationship. So let's take a basic dynamic. If you have a financial crisis, and we can get into what causes it, at the same time as you have large wealth gaps and therefore big disagreements, you are likely to have populism. And if you have those two things coming together, it's an explosive combination. It was said in the earlier session, for example, capitalism. What about capitalism? It's becoming unpopular. Now imagine a bad situation with capitalism, and that's played out through history for good reasons. If you combine that with the external conflict, the war, the external war. When I say war, it is a reality that there are measures of health in an economy's rising and declining. And so when you have that geopolitical conflict and you put that on top, you have a dangerous set of circumstances. In doing that examination of those periods, I found also that there were 2 other big factors that mattered. Those were, interestingly, acts of nature, droughts, floods, and pandemics, killed more people and toppled more of the civilizations than the first 3 I mentioned.
Then inventiveness.
And then number 5 is inventiveness, which then takes technology, the technology. So when I look at these, all of these 5 coming together, I think we're going to go through, like, it'll be almost like a time warp that we're going to go through, that over the next 5 to 10 years, the world is going to be very, very different than it is today.
So let's quickly touch on, you talk about the rise of a power or an empire, it peaks and then it declines. Walk us, pick the Dutch or any empire, walk us through those kinds of phases and what we can expect.
Okay. An order, when I say a world order or a domestic order, is the way you're operating, the system that you're operating on.
How people
and they
work
change.
with each other.
Well, in other words, 1945 we began a new world order. Or in some countries they changed their domestic order. They have a revolution. But there's always a war at the beginning, some kind of conflict at the beginning, and the system changes. Okay, 1945, we have a war. There are new winners of the war. Whether that's domestic or internally, there's a war, and now the new folks are in charge. And they then determine what's going to happen. They set the rules. The United States, since 45, we've been the American world order. The reason the United Nations, IMF, World Bank are in the United States is because of
system.
that. The reason the dollar is the world's reserve currency is because of that. They set the rules. Over that period of time, then you don't go into a war. You have a period of rebuilding and then usually a period of prosperity because nobody wants to go into war again. And then so you begin this cycle. And then that cycle then, to take you through very quickly, that has higher levels of productivity and so on. Basics matter. Things like education, and when I say education,
well, just for the audience's sake, Ray's come up with 18 metrics of measuring health, 8 particular very important ones. You mentioned education. I just want you to touch quickly on, it's not just knowledge and learning, but also you talk about character and other aspects. Define
That's
that
right.
for us. That's very important.
Education, of course, are the ability to do your reading, arithmetic, and all of that. But it also is character development. In other words, you build certain types of people who are capable and also understand character, the ability to get themselves do the difficult things, and to work in a community for a better purpose. That is a fundamental ability. So all of these early stages have those elements, and then they have capital markets. In the early stages, always it's a great benefit if you can put resources in the hands of those who are capable and make those things happen. But over that period of time, debt rises relative to GDP, and there's a mindset change from a mindset of conservatism. Those who went through the war, or my dad who went through the Depression, was not going to be a quick and easy speculator in the stock market. So, and then they get paid, and you get rewarded because the environment improves, and then you become a world's reserve currency. Because when you're dominant in the world and trade, let's say the United States had the highest percentage of trade. It was half the world's economy, half world GDP, and it dominated trade. So through all of these cases, they bring their currency along, and that becomes the vehicle that others want to save in. And when they save in that currency, then of course they are lending you money. And so that compounds. In other words, when a foreigner buys a bond, what they're doing is lending you money. And so the debt tends to compound over a period of time. And then new powers come along. They learn from the great power. The British learned from the Dutch how to build ships that would take them all around the world. So that learning and that rise in their capabilities produces competitors in the world. And so you start to see the new empire becoming more competitive and also having those aspects.
And the British also learned capital markets when William of Orange became King of England and the Bank of England.
Right. Each one of these empires then has the financial center. So the Dutch had the world's financial center. They had the world's reserve currency. They had the best education system. They had these elements.
They had the
then
first
the
stock
British,
exchange, first stock
then
company.
London. So Amsterdam was the world stock market,
Yep.
financial hub. Then in the British Empire, London was. Then in the United States Empire, New York was, or still is. And then now what you're having is a change in that dynamic, of course, where there's then that competition, the great power competition. When those things operate in line together, that's important. So now this is a bigger cycle. Within that bigger cycle, there's a shorter cycle. Okay, look, we all know what the classic business short-term debt cycle is, because there have been 12 since 1945. We're now 12 and a half cycles into them. They're the ones, you have a recession, high unemployment, low inflation. Central banks produce a lot of money and credit. You have that improvement, productivity, it's the sweet spot of the cycle. Then you get past the sweet spot, you produce inflation. Then they tighten monetary policy. And then with the tightening monetary policy, they pull the money, and then things slow up, and then you have the downturn, and you do that over and over again. So we know where we are in this cycle. We are in 12 and a half cycles into this. We're about halfway through this cycle. So we're in the part of the cycle where the central banks have tightened monetary policy, probably close to enough, but not, in my opinion, not that term structure of interest rates has too much of an easing built into it, where there will need to be, interest rates will need to stay higher for a longer period of time. Putting that in perspective, let's say, if we use some, that with that level of tightness, and you have to have a real rate which is high enough for the creditor without having a real rate that's too high for the debtor. So if you take about a 1% real rate, which is, I would say that rule of thumb, that it should be in that, probably that vicinity, 1% real rate, and then you take a core, if you're lucky, you get the 3.5%, probably 4% inflation. I think it's going to be sticky and it's going to come down very slowly in an orderly cyclical fashion. Then you're looking at a 4.5 or 5% interest rate. You have that close to that in the short end of the yield curve, and then but you have a big build, and you have a bond yield which seems too low. And so I think you're going to keep relatively high interest rates. That is if there's a normal supply-demand condition. But there's also a risk. Okay, what's the risk of the two? Just let me get this last punchline point out because I think it's important. What is the risk of too much debt? How does that work? Well, mechanistically, the more debt you have, the more debt service you have to pay, and it starts to encroach on your other spending. Like in Singapore, 20% of the income of the government comes from net savings that they have and it earns. In the United States, it's about 20% goes the other way. We have to pay it. That increases. But the big risk and the risk that we have to watch out for is when the holder of that debt doesn't want to hold that debt anymore, or let's say the supply-demand balance. So for example, right now, we have to sell a lot of debt. And the holders of that debt globally are holding a lot of government debt.
So the bottom line is when the potential buyers decide they don't want to buy, government has two choices, central bank, either raise the interest rate to bring the buyers in, which is going to hurt the domestic economy, or print the money. They always go for printing the money. Now, in terms of in these metrics that you have, the U.S., you'd make the case, is a declining power. China is a rising power. But you have spent a lot of time in China. You've spent a lot of time talking to leaders there and around the world. You said you believe that U.S. and China are on the brink of war and beyond the ability to speak. Beyond the ability to speak is crucial because in the Soviet Union Cold War days, we had mechanisms in place where if something went wrong, you could make sure this thing didn't spin out of control, as it almost did in 1962. Today, in terms of two kinds of wars, one is economic sanctions war and the military. On the economic sanctions war, we tend to think, oh, well, that's just a few tariffs and things like that. Talk about how this can spin out of control, starting with Micron technology, which China's threatened with destruction.
Let me first make clear. I'm just describing what has happened. The relative position of the United States has declined. The relative situation in China has risen. They are now comparable powers. I am not saying that the Chinese are going to win over the Americans or anything like that. I'm just trying, I don't know how this game is. They're going to be comparable powers in a conflict, and those conflicts are multidimensional. So they're about Taiwan, chips, Russia, capital flows.
These are red lines. In
these
Taiwan,
are red lines. We are now at a spot in that relationship where they're close to each other's red lines, and they recognize that almost talking is counterproductive because there's so much blaming and trying to untangle how we got here that it talking. So they are at the red lines, they're at the brinks, and talking is a problem. Both sides are very concerned about the possibility of war, and different types of war. Economic war, certainly a chips war and economic war is a very big risk. And that is happening at a time of that probably conditions might get more contentious because of the political season we're in. So in other words, between now and 2 years from now, when the new administration comes in, you're going to have, there are a lot of hawks that want to push those lines too. And so there's that edge. I'm saying simply that that is a highly risky situation, and on many things you will see a tough game being played, because there's, in world affairs, there's not a judge and jury that you plead your case to in resolution. It's purely a matter of brinksmanship and pushing each other. So that issue is an important issue. It's an existential economic issue. I mean, if we start to think, where would a chips war lead, or those, even in good times, it's a big issue because of the fact that supply line changes. We're no longer in a world in which producing most efficiently wherever it can be done is the primary goal. It's instead self-sufficiency to prepare for war, and that has an inflationary consequence. It has an economic consequence. So we're kind of very close to that. I want to just, in closing, because I know we're about to run out, I just want to emphasize that something particularly that Mary Erdo said. I think when you throw in the new technologies, I'm deeply involved with generative AI technologies and so on. And if you move that forward and you start to, the world is going to change in ways that we cannot anticipate, and it's going to be a different world. And the emphasis of a few points that were made, and I want to reemphasize, is a few things. First, that diversification, to understand how you can diversify well without reducing your returns. Because if you buy equally good things that are not correlated, and then you can do that, you can reduce your risks by about 80% if you can know how to do that. So diversification and knowing how to do that, and looking globally in terms of the differences is very, very important. I would also say that I think the new toxic debt is government debt. So if we look at that, where we're looking at what's the real problem with the banks? The real problem with the banks is the same as the problem with the Federal Reserve. If the Federal Reserve was a commercial bank, it would be in the same position, because it's lost a lot of money in its bonds and its short-term liabilities, and that's true in Europe, that's true around the world. So, so these are certain themes. I know we're over time, so I just want to make sure I got those things out.
Well, when you study history as you have, and made so much created wealth for clients, you have earned extra time, and you can go economicprinciples.com to get Ray's constant insights.
I think it's .org, but I'm not sure.
I think it's com. But anyway,
okay.
I'm not going to argue with you. You're on the Forbes list. I'm not. So, but in terms of the investing, David talks about quads. You can look it up, whether it's a high inflation, low inflation, high growth, low growth. If you go around the quads that you talk about, you can have an all-weather portfolio, which has been one of your hallmarks. But also, too, in terms of the future, while there's a very real chance of a war, economic war, or a bad military war, it's not, as Ray makes very clear in his writings, not inevitable, but patterns of the past should caution you. Because it hasn't happened before, it does not mean it won't happen.
Just echoing that, in part of the book I wrote, read from 1900 to 1950 what it was like, and just make some comparisons today, and that might have implications for the future. I'm just trying to pass that along.
Today's guest is everything from a Grammy-nominated artist to a financial literacy guru. I'm Rosemary Miller here with Ryan Leslie, who will talk all about the music industry and how to manage our money. Thank you so much for joining me today, Ryan.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So we are all trying to make some money, save some money, make our money, make some money. And you have a wealth plan, which is what, a financial literacy club?
Yes.
What gave you the idea to create
It's
this?
a club, I feel as though really when we grow up, we are taught almost culturally that finances are, and there's actually a moniker for it, personal finance, right? And so we are caught in between, should we share what's happening with our finances? Should we keep it a secret? I know for me growing up, it was, hey, you don't talk about how much you make, you don't talk about how much you have invested, how much you have saved. What I found though is that when you can make the journey a collective journey, the pathway to, let's call it understanding of what's actually happening, the ability to have a sounding board where you have a community of folks that are concerned and have some care and consideration for your financial well-being, this can really make a massive difference in the achievement of, let's call it exponential compounding. So that's really what the premise of Wealth Plan was all about, is the fact that when I decided I wanted to learn finances, I wanted to not rent a Bruce Lee movie and teach myself karate. I wanted to learn directly from someone who actually did it the right way. And so Wealth Plan is exactly that. It allows me to, based on what I've been able to achieve, now be able to give back in a way that allows me to be a one-on-one mentor and hopefully make an impact that's not just going to be for the person I'm mentoring, but for a family, for a generation as well.
So speaking of generations, how can someone who, we got no generational wealth, how can they get to that point?
Yeah. To get to generational wealth, so much has been said about it, right? It's such a simple concept. It's the eighth wonder of the world. It is compounding. And you can start, it's really just about starting. So listen, when you think about compounding, you think about it over time, the wealthiest investors, or maybe the most well-known wealthiest investors, the ones that are on the Forbes list, the ones that have done it in the financial markets, those investors are those who started small and just consistently compounded over time. Now, I know that there are so many, let's call it apprehensions when it comes to the stock market. It can be a very sort of, it can be a very sort of opaque, scary place to be, right? And when we look at statistics, when we're able to actually remove the human tendencies that will make an investor lose money, when we're able to remove those human tendencies from our decision making, we're actually able to have smooth sailing when it comes to compounding. So what does that mean? That means that we should be able to drive our decision making with data and statistics. The best data around a company that you want to own is just the fundamental data of how the business is actually performing. And the beauty of the public markets in the United States of America is that every 3 months you can get a very, very clear earnings report from every single company that's publicly traded. And if you want to actually, let's call it, reduce your risk and volatility, you can just invest in an index. And the S&P 500, we hear it talked about all the time, but the reason we hear about it all the time is because when you look at the historical statistical data of being invested in the S&P, a time horizon of 20 years or more means that you have a 0% chance of loss. So if you can take losses out of investing in the stock market, how much more at ease can we be when taking our first steps? And so when we think about generational wealth, and that's the question you're asking, it's about getting started as early as possible. And that means that even if you're starting later, let's say you're starting in 30s, 40s, 50s, you know someone in your family, could be a son, daughter, niece, or nephew, that once you've acquired this knowledge, each one teach one. And it's the ability to actually show how your money is working for you to those who are coming up after you. And once they can, let's call it develop, but not just develop, but master a sense of how to actually navigate the financial markets, you find that starting earlier delivers exponential results over time when it comes to compounding. And what's compounding? It's just incremental gains, 100,000 or even 10,000 or 1,000 that grows by 10%. That percentage is equal for everyone across the board. So if you stay invested for a year, you got $1,000, and you get a 10% return, you're going to make $100 on that 1,000.
So
Learning, yeah, go ahead.
What would you tell someone who, I don't know, they 70 years old, they're doing this, they ain't got all that time.
Yes.
What would you tell that person?
So you're saying someone who's starting much later.
Much later.
Right.
Yeah.
Really, there really is no difference to the strategy, right?
Okay.
Because obviously starting at 70 is much later than, let's say, someone learning at 24 or 25, right? The vehicles into which you can invest remain the same. So the S&P 500 has been around for 70 years. You have to get started. They say the best time to start investing was 20 years ago. The next best time is today.
Okay, so eliminating losses, if there's a way to do that, why isn't everybody doing it?
I would say, you know, amongst the folks that are actually a part of my wealth plan club, really the reasons that I hear for folks who haven't done it is because they were never introduced to this concept. And even though the concepts are very, very simple, they require no more than middle school math to understand, if we look at our educational journey, from the time we're in middle school to when we get to high school to when we get to college, most of our education and training is really focused on making us dependent on the capitalist system in which we live. Living paycheck to paycheck, deciding that we want to go out and actually, you know, go take on a large amount of debt, which is collateralized by a home, the American dream. The difference, though, is when you look at stories of folks that have really made it, and I'm talking about multi-billionaire status, they got started very early and they got started in a different way. And what they did was actual real ownership without having to leverage debt to acquire the ownership. What does that mean? If you've got $100,000, you can actually put $100,000 down on, let's say, a $400,000 house, right? You're actually taking on $300,000 in debt. On the flip side, if you have $100,000 and you invest it, let's say, in Apple, this isn't financial advice, but if you were to invest that $100,000 in Apple, the difference there is based on the actual brokerage system that we have in the United States. Not only do you actually own outright the piece of the business that you bought when you spent $100,000 on Apple, the brokerage system will actually allow you to be your own bank, which means that if you got $100,000 in Apple, because it's been such a well-performing company, the brokerage will actually allow you to borrow against that asset, and it's collateralized by the asset. So in some cases, I've worked with folks who have got $100,000 in Apple, but they might need, you know, $70,000 to start a business. Well, they're able to actually leverage $50,000 of that $100,000, start the business, and pay themselves back. All the while, they never had to sell any of their Apple stock. So while they spent a year, 2 years, 3 years developing that business, growing that $50,000 investment, hopefully into $250,000, Apple stock that they own for that $100,000 is working in the background over those 3 years as well. And if we look at just what's happened this year in Apple stock, it has actually achieved new all-time highs. And that is really the byproduct of excellent leadership, excellent product, excellent services. You find that those businesses, productive assets that we own, they are going to outperform over time.
So in your opinion, what's one thing that sets a good investor from a great investor apart?
Yeah, so a good investor from a great investor. I know there's so much that's been written about this, but I would say that it's really just about automating and removing emotion from your investment decisions. I would say that really there are 3 human tendencies that I come across in working with the folks that come to join our wealth plan club, and that's fear, greed, and ego, all right? So fear, very, very simple. There's 2 sides of the coin. Fear of missing out. Oh my goodness, I see, and let's go back to Apple stock. It's at all-time highs. Oh my gosh, I need to buy right now. And there is, let's call it a disconnect about how the stock market works. When a company is running up, it doesn't mean that it's always just going to be a straight line up. There will be times where investors may take some profits off of the table. So fear of missing out may cause an investor to overpay for an investment, right? Because they're chasing, right, a concept or an idea. But also fear of losing money. So maybe because of their fear of missing out, they might buy a company at 300 or 400 a share, and that company might come all the way down to 250 or 225. And that fear of losing money will cause them to sell, as opposed to actually allowing the company the time to actually grow and develop as a great investment. So fear, greed, which kind of drives the American capitalist system in general. And so our desire to retire earlier, to make more money faster, that sort of feeds into this frenzy in some cases that we may find in the markets. And then also ego. There are a number of folks who may all of a sudden say, well, I've watched all the YouTube videos, I've looked at all of the interviews that Rosemary's ever done, I've read all the books, and I just know where the market is going to go. And as Warren Buffett has said so aptly, the markets can remain irrational longer than most investors, or really any investor, can remain solvent. So even if you do actually know, and you feel like you know, and you're like, there's no way that this company can keep going down and down and down and down, I'm just going to keep buying, I'm just going to keep holding on. What Warren is really saying is that the markets can remain irrational longer than you can continue to buy into that investment. So really, for investors that are just getting started, my recommendation, and once again, not financial advice, but what I've seen work very, very well over decades and decades, is just creating an automated way out of every paycheck or anytime you get paid to actually own as much of the American financial ecosystem as possible. And if you don't have an idea of what exact companies to pick, just buy a basket of 500 great companies like the S&P, or buy a basket of the top 100 technology companies. If you feel like, hey, technology is transforming the way that we live and interact, we can buy the NASDAQ 100. It's not very, very expensive, and you can do so by just automating it. The beauty of index funds is that they actually are, they're set up in such a way that you don't have to do the buying and selling. So when a company is no longer worthy of being in the S&P, the index will automatically rebalance. It will allow a different company to come in, so that you're always really in the best investments, the best vehicles for your capital.
So I'm curious, what are your thoughts on cryptocurrency?
My thoughts on cryptocurrency, well, I've had an incredible journey with crypto. If you check my Twitter all the way back, I would say 2013, I said, pay me in Bitcoin. So all the way back, we're talking 10 years ago now. Yeah. And there was a time where all of my royalties, all of my revenue, I was making sure that people were actually paying me in Bitcoin all the way back then. So when I was earning the bulk of my revenue in Bitcoin, it was really trading at about $125 a coin. Fast forward to now, it's about $30,000 a coin as of today. And so I've had an incredible journey there, but I've mostly stayed invested in the flagship cryptocurrency, which is Bitcoin.
So do you ever suggest cryptocurrency to any of your clients?
Well, I actually never suggest an investment. What I mostly do is just teach them about all of the different vehicles. And we're talking about even complex derivatives in some cases, how to buy and sell promises in the stock market to earn more on your capital. I just want to make sure that I educate and really just provide a framework, let's call it a framework through which they can view their investing journey.
So you mentioned you wanted to be paid in Bitcoin for your royalties.
Yes.
So I'm not sure if you saw, but Snoop Dogg recently had a big issue with the streaming industry for musicians.
Right.
So could you talk about that? I want to know, like, how are artists getting paid with streaming?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty simple. You can really just do a Google search and say, how much do I get per stream? And it's going to tell you it's about maybe 0.005 cents, if we want to call it. So like a half a penny or so on every single stream. So when you think about how streaming is actually working, where you can release a song, and get millions and millions of streams. You just multiply those millions of streams by that percentage of a penny that you get for every stream. Now, the bottom line is that the music industry has needed to evolve. We don't have physical CDs. Maybe if you're a collector, you still have some physical vinyl. But at the end of the day, really, we want to have the entire library of all recorded music right in our pocket on our mobile device. And so companies like Spotify, and you can buy Spotify, you can own Spotify if you believe in that, companies like Apple Music, they provide those platforms, Jay-Z's Tidal, provide those platforms so that you actually can make your playlist. If you have a running playlist, you have a playlist for romance, you have a playlist for a wedding, a party, you have the ability to do it.
I want to know, is streaming better or worse than going through a record label for artists?
Well, record companies, they actually are streaming their artists as well, right?
Okay.
So the bottom line is that whether you're signed to a major or you're releasing independently, you have the same opportunity to distribute your music globally through the streaming platforms. And there are a number of aggregators. One of my favorites is Steve Stout's United Masters. You don't have to be signed to a major label. The major label is really to have some infrastructure and to have some capital behind your release. But if you've got your own infrastructure and capital, you can literally press 2 buttons, go to an aggregator, go to a distributor, and literally within 1 week, your music is available globally.
So are you at all afraid of AI's disruption in the music industry? It has its pros, but it definitely has its cons. Is it going to put some people out of business?
I believe that technology is already sort of transforming really every single aspect of our lives. And I always have approached technology from a place of embracing the technology, understanding the technology, and understanding the ways that human intelligence is differentiated from artificial intelligence. In so doing, obviously we're the ones that came up with AI. In so doing, we can understand how we can remain valuable as the landscape changes. When you look at the headlines, I think I've seen, in some of the Forbes headlines recently, that if you can be a great prompter for ChatGPT, you can be earning 6-7 figures per year. And so it is about understanding where the opportunity is. And that opportunity is really in embracing the technology, understanding the technology, mastering the technology so that you can actually benefit from it. And I believe that that goes for any industry that may, want to put new and emerging technology at arm's length. What I found is that great companies that lean into research and development, they find that they're able to accelerate their place in the future of what our economy and what our world is going to look like.
So that sounds like skills-based learning. That's a skill, learning how to do a prompt.
Yeah.
And I know you're a Harvard man and you're all about education, but what do you think the value of a college degree will be in the near future?
For me, when I think about my time at Harvard, man, some of the buddies that I have there, my buddy Taj Clayton, my boy Mark Price, my brothers Dalio and Bashir, folks that I met during Harvard, my other buddy Lex, these are all folks or people that I met through colleagues at Harvard. One of my longtime partners, Rashid Richmond, his sister was at school with me, his sister Afra. I believe that being in that ecosystem with high performance critical thinkers is the true value of that college experience. So anyone that you ask, whether they've gone to Cornell or whether they've gone to USC, whether they've gone like my sister at Cal Berkeley, there are relationships that are built there in the formative years of our lives where you find potential business partners, potential collaborators, lifetime and lifelong friends. And I believe that that's really sort of a priceless exchange for the tuition that we pay. Now, the other reason why I'm never really worried about tuition is because when you can master what we were talking about at the beginning of this conversation, you can take a very small amount of capital and over time compound that capital to cover whatever expenses you may have accrued in student loan debt, et cetera. And I think a lot of what I've found is people necessarily either A, just don't want to learn it, B, they have maybe somebody in their family lost some money in the stock market, says, I don't want to touch that at all. But what we find is that being uninvested is actually losing you money, right? Because all of the headlines, at least the current headlines, are very, very focused around inflation. The cost of goods and services are going higher. So that means that a dollar today is actually really retains less purchasing power. So you've got to find some way to crack the whip on that money and make it do some somersaults and make it work for you. Otherwise, what you'll find is the same $10 that you wanted to spend on a quick run to, you know, one of the bodegas uptown, that $10 is buying you less and less and less. So that means that you need to make sure that whether it's with our Wealth Plan Club or just on your own or with someone that you trust, you have to figure out how to actually make the money that you earn and work so hard for. You have to figure out a way to actually make that money work for you. And that's what we do at Wealth Plan.
So other than Wealth Plan, what's next for Ryan Leslie?
Listen, this, I think, for me has really become I think it will be a part of my legacy, what I'm doing at Wealth Plan. It's tremendously rewarding to unlock a financial future that someone may have almost completely overlooked. And the way that we work at Wealth Plan is it's very individualized and tailored. So it's one-on-one, and it's for folks that actually, like me, when I first was seeking out a mentor, they want that personalized attention. They understand it's called personal finance for a reason, and they want to actually have someone to show them the way in a real way, one-on-one, step-by-step, hand-in-hand. And so that's what I've been doing. I'm not a financial advisor. I'm not a stockbroker. All I can do is show folks what has made a multi-million-dollar difference in the returns in my portfolio. And because of those returns, it gives me the latitude, it gives me the opportunity outside of obviously running my venture-backed company, Superphone, right, which is about technology. We can talk about that a little bit more. Outside of doing that, it provides a very, very rewarding aspect to my life, because what's the use of being wealthy on your own? You want to have folks around you who once, let's say we can turn 100 people into millionaires. Well, that's $100 million of financial power that we can put behind the initiatives, the change that we want to see in the world. So I believe for me, this is a piece of everything I'll be doing for the rest of my life, is teaching in this way. But on the flip side, I've always sort of had this concept of being of service. So when I was in the music business, the first jobs that I had, even though I wanted to be in front of the cameras, was to actually be behind the scenes as the producer. And so for me, it was about providing the highest level of service. So somebody needed 3 song ideas, you give them 9, right? And then once I was able to get in front of the cameras and was starting to tour, I would listen to feedback from audiences, especially when I was overseas, and they say, well, God, you know, artists will come from overseas and they'll get on stage and they'll do a backing track and they'll be out of here in 30 minutes. Like, you know, it's God's gift to mankind that they got on a plane to come over and perform for us. And so for me, in that spirit of service, I spent the extra money to bring the band out, and we would play 2-hour, 3-hour, in some cases, you know, marathons, 6-hour sets. And so people could understand Ryan's about delivering a higher level of service. And so I started to get a lot of folks that would say, hey, Ryan, you know, I want to make it in the music business. And the music business is really sort of tied to, let's say, just a little bit of serendipity. You're not able to just say, if I make a song and I put this much money behind it, it's going to go. If that was the case, everybody would have a hit. So the way that I can give back in a way that is objectively valuable is really twofold. Number one, success really happens at the speed of communication. So what we do at Superphone is we put a layer of technology on text messaging and a layer of technology over our phones, which allows me, currently I'm on text with more than 130,000 people. I've had those conversations, but it's not just about the text, it's also about the ability to layer that on a phone system and to do it personally. We've all heard about call centers. You call up Delta Airlines or you call up somewhere, there's call centers and they're redirecting your call somewhere, or you're talking to a robot. My belief, and the belief that we have at Superphone, and the reason why we have a patent on some of the technology that we're building for automated digital conversation management, is because my belief is that when we can unlock, like if I was to ask you right now, how many contacts do you have in your phone? You might not know offhand. But if I gave you your phone and you scrolled all the way to the bottom and you said, oh, well, I've got 300 contacts, 500 contacts, 750, 1,000 contacts, the reality is you're likely only engaging with maybe 3% of those contacts, right? Because we like to keep our circle small. So what I'm doing at Superphone is my way of being of service, not subjectively. Because if someone doesn't like my music, then I can't really serve them.
Being
Go
of
ahead.
service.
Yes.
That's what's next. That's what you're going to continue
That's
doing.
what drives what I'm doing. Absolutely.
Thank you so much for joining me today, Ryan.
Thanks, Rosemary. Appreciate you.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Mark, for taking time to talk to Forbes.
Happy to.
What is the biggest technological innovation of your lifetime?
I think if I had to pick to date, it would probably be mobile, giving everyone the ability to connect. But I think going forwards, I mean, the two that I'm the most excited about are AI is obviously just having a huge moment right now. There have been awesome breakthroughs in the last year on this, and I just think that this is going to transform all of the different products that we have and everything across the industry. So, my own view is that there isn't going to be one kind of big central super intelligence. I think that there are going to be a lot of different AIs that people interact with for different things and that we interact with throughout our day. And I'm really excited to try to help make that happen. The other one that I think is going to be very exciting over time is the metaverse, right? The ability for people to basically feel physically present with another person, no matter where you actually are in the world, right? So in the near term, we get that with VR, where you can jump in and you can be embodied as an avatar and just feel like you're right there with another person. There's something that's sort of magical about that you don't get in any other kind of screen or technology that we use. That nothing really replaces the feeling of being there with another person. But over the long term, I think we're going to get that through a pair of normal-looking glasses where we could be having this conversation in the future and one of us could just be a hologram sitting here and having a normal kind of full interaction feeling like we're physically there with each other. And I think that's going to be really, really just a huge deal. But that's, at Meta, the main thing that I'm focused on is we talk about building the future of human connection. And I think, those two areas really blend together to be that, right? For giving people the ability to feel present with another person no matter where they are. And then also over the long term, giving people the ability to interact not just with people, but also AIs and businesses that they care about in different ways is just all part of the future of making the world more connected. So I think it's super exciting.
I mean, this idea of putting on glasses and then you could be a hologram or I could be a hologram, is that a decade or more away? Like any idea?
No, I hope not.
Oh, less? Really?
Yeah, less. Well, first of all, you are going to be able to do it, and you can do it with Quest Pro today, and when Quest 3 comes out, you'll be able to do it with mixed reality, right? So the first headsets that we made were virtual reality, which basically meant that you kind of were fully immersed in a world around you. Now you put on the headset, and by default, you're kind of in your living room, or you see the physical world around you, and you see digital objects overlaid on that. And I think that's, so we're starting to get that. And I think over the coming years, we'll get to this zone where it's, the digital world isn't just something that we access through phones or screens. It'll be more and more just kind of blended into the world around us. A lot of the art or the games or media or screens or, it's actually an interesting thought experiment just to think about how much of the stuff around you could be a hologram, right? I mean, your chair can't be because you need to physically sit on it. Food can't be because you need to physically eat it. But most of the other things around us actually probably could be holograms over time. And that's going to open up a lot of interesting opportunities too. So you're getting that with these kind of headsets like Quest already, that millions of people have access to. And then my hope is that over the next several years, we'll also get increasingly powerful glasses. But that's a very hard tech problem because you're basically fitting like the equivalent of a supercomputer into a pair of normal looking glasses. So making things small is hard.
I think that's why I was thinking
Yeah.
it would take a decade. Because thinking about the difference in size between what the Quest 3 and the Ray-Ban Stories, those are pretty different,
Yeah, and it's not necessarily that you're going to be able to do the same thing with both. Just like, a computer might have more power on your desk than your phone, but you can still do a lot of awesome stuff with your phone. My guess is that glasses will walk around throughout the day with them. They won't be quite as powerful as what you'll be able to do with a full headset. But so maybe if you're like sitting down to work on something, or if you're like a surgeon and you're going to do a remote surgery, then you probably want like a more powerful VR headset, not just a small pair of glasses. But for like mobile use cases, walking around, in places where you're going to be interacting with a lot of other people live, where you want to be, you want to see the people around you, not just have a headset on. I think that's going to be super useful. So
Wow.
yeah, no, I think it's going to be this decade.
What would you say is the hardest part of running Meta?
Well, I think the hardest, this may just be for me because of the way that I'm oriented, but it's a big company, and I think getting the people right and the culture right is the thing that both matters the most and is sort of the hardest to dial, especially as the company scales. And one of the things that I've found over time is, we've gone through these different periods as a company where sometimes people think we're awesome, sometimes people think we're terrible, sometimes people think we're just like everything we do is going to be a winner, and sometimes people think like we're like the gang that can't shoot straight, and like we just nothing that we do is going to work. But regardless of what people are saying externally, I've found that if you can keep sort of a good amount of internal cohesion, you can get anything done, right? Whereas even when, sometimes people are very excited about the company, if people internally aren't actually aligned on what we need to go do, then it's very hard to get things done. So for me, I mean, it's maybe somewhat of a trite thing to say, but I think this is all about getting people right, and getting the right people to involved, and building great teams of awesome people to be able to build new things that are super impressive for a lot of people. So that to me is probably what I spend the most time focused on, and it's probably the most important part of running a company.
I think that sounds fair to me. Who is your biggest rival, and how are you competing against them?
Well, we have a lot of competitors in pretty much everything we do, from social media to devices to advertising to like all the different areas. But I don't know. I guess one philosophy that I've always had is I actually think the thing that determines your destiny is not a competitor, it's how you execute. And I think most companies probably focus too much on competitors, and maybe even focus too much on ideas. And I think at the end of the day, a lot of what makes great companies great is the ability to just like relentlessly execute and efficiently execute, and do that rigorously and just get better and better at it all the time. And that's one of the things that we've really focused on. So I don't know, maybe it's like it's sort of like a very, like martial arts view of the world or something, that it's like when you go into a competition, you're not fighting another person, you're fighting yourself, right? And you're just trying to be a better version of yourself and make the company better and able to better execute every day. But I always tell our company that whenever I've gotten asked that question, like a lot of times over time, and it's always just no, like we don't control our competitors, but we do control what we do, and we can get better at it, and that's how we build better things for the world.
And you're okay, obviously, mimicking features at other competitors and trying to roll them out here, right? I mean, we've certainly seen that.
You want to learn from what people in the world are enjoying and finding useful, right? And yeah, I think you want to be humble about it, right? It's not every great idea is going to come from us. I like to think that we invent a lot of things, but no, I think that the idea that like we would create everything that people want to use is ridiculous, right? So yeah, of course we want to be looking around and seeing what people find useful and trying to do our own take on those things and make them even better. And I think that kind of natural competition is how these ideas get honed and things get better in the world. If
you're in a match with Elon and he uses the heel hook move, how do you defend against it?
Well, I don't think that fight's gonna happen, but look, I mean, I love the stuff. I like competing. I like doing it with friends. It's like an important part of my daily workout. But And I like competing too. I started doing jiu-jitsu competitions earlier this year. I want to do an MMA competition or do kind of a formal fight sometime in the next year. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm probably going to do it with someone who takes the sport really seriously and does it competitively or as a professional. So I'm training hard and looking forward to it. But no, to your question about a heel hook, that's a relatively high-level jiu-jitsu move. So I think the person would have to be pretty serious and experienced in order to be even attempting that.
Fanciful promises and self-salesmanship made Vivek Ramaswamy a billionaire by age 38. That same playbook has fueled his early rise in presidential politics. Win or lose in 2024, he'll emerge richer and more powerful than ever, just how he planned it. Hi everybody, I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. Joining me now is senior wealth reporter John Hyatt. John, thanks so much for joining me.
Always good to see you, Brittany.
GOP presidential contender Vivek Ramaswamy went from a relatively unknown candidate to part of the national conversation really overnight, starting in that August debate. So to kick things off, can you tell us who is Vivek Ramaswamy?
Vivek Ramaswamy is a businessman. He made his fortune first in hedge fund investing and then by starting a biotech company called Roivant Sciences. That's ROI Vant Sciences. And, Vivek is somebody who is always thinking about ROI, whether it's in business, whether it's in politics, whether it's in the friendships he pursues. And his obsession with getting his own personal return on investment and maximizing that has driven him to the billionaire ranks. He became a billionaire a few months ago when Roivant's stock was at its peak. It's since dipped a little bit, but he still boasts a very impressive $930 million net worth as of yesterday's market close. And, he also owns a Strive Asset Management. They're an investment firm that he founded just before entering the presidential race. So, he's somebody with his hands in multiple hats, so to say. He's got his biotech empire. He's got his Strive Asset Management firm, which sells ETFs to retail investors and boasts an anti-woke ideology. And now he's entered politics, and he's done a very interesting job of sort of marrying those interests.
Before we kick things off and discuss his obsession with the return on investment, he has some Midwestern roots. Can you explain where he's from and the importance of that?
Vivek grew up outside of Cincinnati. He's a first-generation son of two parents who left India to pursue a better life in the United States. He went to an elite Catholic boys' school where he graduated as valedictorian, and from there he got accepted into Harvard, and he's been on the rise ever since.
You mentioned that he has this sort of anti-woke ideology. What was the catalyst to really propel Vivek Ramaswamy to run for president? And what are some of those main issues that he's really championing?
It's a good question. Why is he running for president? This is a millennial finance guy who has no political experience. He didn't vote in numerous presidential elections during his 20s. So, I think we can trace Vivek's sort of political awakening back to 2020. He's always been, conservative, and, at Harvard, he, was affiliated with the Republican Club there. When he was at Yale Law School, he made friends with people like future U.S. Senator J.D. Vance, who was a classmate of his. He met Peter Thiel at Yale. So he's always been somebody who's, been conservative and right-leaning. But in 2020, there was, of course, we all know 2020. It was, early COVID. There were protests after the murder of George Floyd. Black Lives Matter was front and center. And Vivek was faced by employees at Roivant who wanted him to speak out on behalf of the Black Lives Matter protests. And Vivek didn't want to do that. And that was sort of his first tussling with political issues, was in the business context. So, flash forward a year or so, he's been writing op-eds for the Wall Street Journal. He's appearing in Fox News. He steps down from Roivant as CEO to focus on this stuff full time. And he writes his first book, Woke Inc. Becomes a New York Times bestseller. all of a sudden he's kind of, as the New Yorker christened him, the godfather of anti-wokeism. And so, from there, he founded Strive Asset Management. He found a way to monetize the anti-woke gospel that he's preaching. And by running for president, he's essentially found a new platform or a new way for him to get his message out there and to build his own profile and to build the profile of Strive as well.
In your reporting, you discussed his obsession with return on investment. You were actually with him on the campaign trail, both in New Hampshire and then Iowa. So how did you see that playing out as you reported on him?
It's interesting because his focus on ROI, we can trace that back to his hedge fund days and his days as a biotech entrepreneur founding ROI Vant Sciences. So it's sort of a long-held worldview that Ramaswamy operates under. But it's completely different in retail politicking, in Iowa diners and New Hampshire restaurants, right? This is a whole different environment that he's operating in. Yet he remains the hyper-analytical, always listening, always calculating guy that he was in business. And we see this through just the way he responds to people's questions. He's very good at reading a room. He knows how to whip a crowd up, as you've seen yourself in Iowa. And, sometimes, we see it by him sort of mucking about in some of the more conspiratorial QAnon-themed ideas that some of these GOP primary voters are asking about. For example, in New Hampshire, one woman asked about the epidemic of child sex trafficking in the United States, and he immediately referenced Sound of Freedom. That's a movie that's been embraced by QAnon adherents, and you see the results when he sort of name drops these ideas or these concepts. People clap, people like it, they see that he understands the issues that they care about and that they are thinking about. But his ROI also extends to powerful folks in society who can help his campaign. When I was trailing him in Iowa, he, casually name-dropped Elon Musk as an advisor that he would want if he were to be elected president. Sure enough, that generated news stories, people saying, Ramaswamy says he'll appoint Elon Musk an advisor. Sort of overlooked in that, though, too, was that Ramaswamy has praised Elon Musk for gutting Twitter's workforce by 75%, saying that he wants to model his own dismantling of the federal bureaucracy on Elon Musk. And sure enough, 2 days later after those comments, Elon Musk on his platform X endorsed Ramaswamy for the vice presidential slot. So, Vivek is always eyeing opportunities, whether it's to win over the retail voter or to win over another backer like Musk. He's always calculating.
Something that you said that I can second is that he can really work a crowd. And something I noticed in Iowa, I was able to see most of the candidates, and he was able to get his points across very succinctly. He has those 10 truths that are succinct. They hit on a host of different issues, a lot of red meat issues. And I want to talk about his retail politicking a little bit. You wrote this in your story. Donald Trump campaigns like Donald Trump operates business, but you wrote Vivek Ramaswamy campaigns like Vivek Ramaswamy. First, can you explain that a little bit? And second, how is he doing on the campaign trail?
Yeah, so, who is Vivek Ramaswamy, right? That's kind of a fundamental question of understanding how he operates. And, folks I spoke with who worked with him in business say that he is nonstop. Few people have as much energy as he has. The guy eats 3 or 4 meals at a single meal, is what his longtime friend and Strive co-founder Anson Frericks told me. And so on the campaign trail, you see a guy who is essentially just nonstop. He's event after event. He answers questions. He smiles with people. He's always alert. He's not somebody who sort of, slips into, automaton mode and, just reads off a teleprompter. He doesn't use a teleprompter. He basically extemporizes all of his speeches. And, he's always seeing ahead of what his audience is thinking in a way. He knows sort of how they think. He knows the issues that they care about. And he's always playing on them.
One of the defining moments in August's debate was him and Nikki Haley, the former UN ambassador, clashing over foreign policy. That led to people saying he might not be experienced to be the president, but we haven't seen him really embroiled in any major controversies on the trail so far. But in his private life, what are the controversies he's faced there?
You know, Vivek Ramaswamy hasn't, you know, he's not like a Trump type who has faced all these accusations of fraud and, you know, wrongdoing. Like, I think the biggest controversy he's faced is, you know, one of his companies, Axovant. This was the company he created and took public in a massive $3 billion IPO. And its only asset was an Alzheimer's drug that had already failed 4 clinical trials, but he purchased it for $5 million. And, you know, his claim and those that he was working with was that this drug was overlooked, that it actually was going to be this big cure for Alzheimer's. And so, you know, this was right when he founded Roivant. This was sort of the first big test case for Roivant, which was rescuing drugs shelved by Big Pharma. And, you know, they took it public in this big IPO. He built out Roivant. And, you know, 2 years later, the drug flopped, its 5th trial. Today, that company, Axovant, is in the process of being liquidated. And so it was a massive failure. And, you know, Vivek has recognized that it was a massive failure. But, you know, ultimately, he didn't lose from it. He did fine. You know, Roivant continued to grow before Axovant flopped. And, you know, Roivant is an interesting company because it's a biotech company, but essentially it's a venture capital portfolio company. It buys up all these different drugs. Some of them don't work, and some of them do. And the company has never turned a profit. So it's kind of ironic that the big return on investment, you know, themed company has never made a profit. So I think there's some controversy there. But I think more recently on the campaign trail, he's been stirring up controversy with a lot of his provocative, you know, pledges, whether it's dismantling the federal bureaucracy by laying off 75% of the workforce, whether it's cutting off aid to Ukraine. You know, these are not statements he makes offhanded. These are intentional. He knows that they're going to drive press, and earned media is a big part of his campaign strategy. So, you know, he's finding ways to drive ROI in politics through stoking controversy.
You were able to join him on the campaign trail a few times, once in New Hampshire and then in Iowa directly after that first debate in August. So can you give us a feeling of what your personal impression of Vivek Ramaswamy was?
Hyper analytical, very numbers focused, very intense, always alert, always somebody who's thinking ahead, very online savvy. You know, he's constantly on X or on Instagram, posting videos of himself talking or, you know, coming out with snarky tweets. He's nonstop. He's somebody who is in campaign mode 100% of the time. And he tells me that, you know, the only time he's not in campaign mode is when he's, you know, at home with his, you know, wife and 2 children in Columbus, Ohio. But I mean, the guy is campaigning nonstop, so it's not like that's a ton of his time.
So those tweets are Vivek, not a social media team?
I didn't see any social media team drafting tweets on his behalf. I'm sure he has people who will do that, but a lot of his tweets are him tweeting on the fly. He even interrupted one of our interviews to send out a tweet.
Do you know what the tweet was?
Yeah, it was so we were driving across New Hampshire, and you know, I was in the car with him, and there were 2 other journalists there, and in the course of the interview, he kind of stopped because one of his advisors had texted him something that Al Sharpton had said. And he said, oh, I know what I'm going to say here. And so he drafted a tweet basically mocking Al Sharpton. And I think it got like over 1 million impressions or something. So, and it was quick. You know, he didn't give it much thought. It was, you know, boom, there's a tweet. Okay, back to the interview. Like, here we go. He's nonstop.
You were with him, and now he is part of the major dialogue when it comes to this 2024 election. Do you think there's anything missing when it comes to Vivek Ramaswamy in the national conversation?
I think that there is a general lack of understanding of his business interests and how his ongoing business interests continue to inform the way he politics and the way he sees the world. I mean, he told me, look, I've stepped down from my boards, I'm not involved in my businesses, but he remains the controlling shareholder of Strive Asset Management. So he's ultimately the ones who makes any sort of big decision that, you know, Strive that Strive has to do. Even his own campaign disclosures still list him as the executive chairman of Strive. That's a position that he said he stepped down from, and we never got a good explanation for why his own campaign disclosures still say he's executive chairman. So I think in general, there's sort of a lack of understanding of how Roivant works, but also that, this is a guy who is still operating his businesses, who's still, has a lot financially to gain from running for president. And that's what I hope our piece in Forbes explores.
Don, we're a couple months from the first primary election. What do you see next for Vivek Ramaswamy?
I think he's going to lose to Trump. I think they're all going to lose to Trump. And I think Vivek is smart enough to understand this. There have been rumors that he would be a good vice president for Trump. He's mostly swatted those rumors aside. He told me, I don't do well as a number 2. He doesn't want to be vice president. But look, who knows? Maybe he'll change his tune. We've seen him change his tune on various issues in politics, so who's to say he won't again? But the way he's engineered his political profile is that he can't lose. He's only getting more attention for himself. He's become part of the MAGA pantheon, and he has a business that directly aligns with his political persona. So that company, Strive, stands to do well too. So wherever Ramaswamy goes next, he's probably going to emerge a winner.
In August, you reported he is a self-made billionaire. So financially speaking, is this run for president good for Vivek?
Yes, it certainly seems to be. He has put his own money into his campaign, to be fair. As of June 30th, he'd sunk about $16 million into his campaign, $15 million of which was booked as a loan. But as we write in our piece, you could also view that as a marketing expense for Strive. He's gained access to millions of viewers through his endless hits on Fox News, through the debates. This is somebody who is now a national figure. 6 months ago, that wasn't the case.
Yeah, and we're talking about him now on Forbes Talks.
Indeed, and don't forget, he's only 38 years old, so he's going to be with us for decades to come.
John Hyatt, thanks for your reporting.
Thanks, Brittany.
Since leaving Google as chairman, Eric Schmidt has wielded a $20 billion fortune to build an ecosystem of influence. And for the past 2 years, the 68-year-old committed at least $100 million to a startup accelerator called Steel Perlow, which he leads as executive chairman with CEO Michelle Ritter, a 29-year-old entrepreneur who he has been dating. Hi, everyone. I'm Rosemary Miller here with David Jeans, a senior writer here at Forbes. Thank you so much for joining me today, David.
Thanks.
So, David, for starters, who is Eric Schmidt?
So, Eric Schmidt was the longtime CEO of Google, and then he went on to become the chairman before leaving a few years ago. In recent years, he's sort of crafted this image of himself as a Silicon Valley statesman and also an influential person in government in terms of advising on policy around tech and AI and national security. And he's done this by building an immense portfolio of companies and funds and philanthropic ventures that he's backed with his family fortune. So especially as the debate around AI has heated up this year, he's become an even more consequential figure. And we've seen him do a lot of work to especially, build out more of these businesses.
So, David, what do we know about Steel Perlow? And could you tell me who is Michelle Ritter?
So, Steel Perlow is a company that Eric Schmidt started in 2021 with a woman that he was dating at the time called Michelle Ritter. She was an entrepreneur and a graduate of Columbia Law School. And together they launched this company with the idea that they could invest in AI companies, build companies and incubate them, kind of, sort of like Y Combinator. And also they saw it as a way to build a talent network of really smart, intelligent people where they could perhaps, foster innovation and create new ventures, whether that be like new philanthropic arms, or whether that be creating a virtual reality company or something to address banking issues. It was supposed to be like an ideas hub where they could do this. But The major thing about Steel Pillow was that Eric, as we reported, went to commit at least $100 million to this venture.
$100 million. Well, you also spoke with Michelle Ritter, right? Could you tell us a little bit about that conversation you had with her?
Yeah, so the thing that we set out to do with this story was to try and understand what exactly it was that Steel Pillow is and does, and what its purpose was, and more broadly how it fit into the ecosystem of Schmidt companies and entities that he oversees. And so as part of that, it was important for us to talk to Michelle, in her role as CEO of the company, what the goal of the company was, how it was financed, and how they made decisions on investments. It was also important for us to understand whether or how, the dynamic around the fact that they had been dating was, and while also leading a company, with dozens of employees, and how that dynamic played out. When I spoke to Michelle, she shared a lot about sort of what her background, some of the work that she'd done, the ideas that she had. She talked about this one venture that she'd come up with called StarX, which was a fan engagement platform that she had been working on since college. And she mentioned to me that was a program that now is in beta testing with FIFA. She also had mentioned to me that there was a wealth management and asset management platform that she was overseeing at Steel Pillow, and that it was managing about $450 million. However, we later found out, upon when we wanted to get more details about this asset management platform, Michelle later clarified to us that actually the money that she said she'd been managing, it was only committed via letter of intent, which means that the money wasn't currently being managed by Steel Pillow. So there were some specifics around that we just had to iron out through the reporting process, and that was the result of having extensive conversations with her about how she was leading the company.
And so what do the employees have to say about the company?
So we did speak to quite a few employees to try and understand how the company was run, and what, or if it was successful in what it had set out to do. Some of the feedback that we did receive, that revolved around the fact that it was often hard to understand what some of the business ventures were and whether they were successful. There was quite a high turnover rate, and some of the employees said that often the CEO, Michelle, had said that there was influential people like Jeff Bezos or Michael Bloomberg that had been committed or involved in the company. And, later when we asked Michelle about that, she said that there was no formal partnerships. There was also, I think that there was one quote that we included in the story, and that was that one employee told us that they felt that they had sort of entered Steel Pillow thinking that it was an opportunity to work with Eric Schmidt and, his concept to fund the future, but they left with a feeling that, in fact, they'd been working for more or less a vanity project.
Wow. And does Schmidt typically mix business with pleasure?
What was significant about this to us was the fact that this appeared to be the first time that he had launched a major business venture with someone that he was reported to have been dating.
And how long have they been dating?
Well, both parties did not comment on the relationship or any personal relationship between them. It was reported in 2021 that they had been dating, and since then it was more or less, understood that they had somewhat of a relationship. And, it's not entirely clear what the current status is or how it applies to the business currently.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today, David.
Thank you.